Dr. Tomás Bogardus, thank you very much for joining me on the Rational Roundtable podcast. I appreciate it.
All right, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Would you mind briefly explaining how you got into the philosophy of gender and what motivates you to publish on this topic?
Sure. So I think it was back in 2016 or 2017 or so. I mean, this sort of issue was rising to public consciousness, I think, with people like Caitlyn Jenner and Jordan Peterson in the news. And so I definitely taken notice of what was happening and felt sort of confused and bewildered by it all. Didn't really understand what was being said or what the debates were about. And then it was just sort of a little bit of fortuitous sort of happenstance. I published a paper in a journal called Ethics, and I happened to be looking through neighboring issues, and I just saw a paper on philosophy of gender by a philosopher named Katherine Jenkins I think that was published in 2016. And I thought, okay, well, this could be a chance to, read something on this and start thinking about these issues. And then, that article, turned out to be pretty influential and pretty important and helps connect me to the rest of the literature. So I think that's where it started. And I started, having students read these things in class, and we talk about it in class. And then those sorts of class lectures turn into outlines, which turn into presentations, which turn into papers. So I think that's eventually what happened to me starting in around 2017.
And then you've also got involved, of course, online, having your relatively famous debate with Vosh, and you've spoken about this topic in our circles as well. So that's always good to see. Right.
Yeah. I've noticed that people in the debates that were traditionally about philosophy of religion have also started taking an interest in this. So for some reason, it's of interest to people who are concerned about philosophy of religion. Yeah. So I think that's interesting.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well. I'm curious, do you think there's a reason for that? Is there a reason why specifically people that are into religious discourse have got into that?
Yeah, I guess these sorts of issues about gender and identity certainly touch on issues of ethics and autonomy and what a human person is and what our purpose or goal, if we have one, is in life. What the purpose of life is, if there is one. So these issues in philosophy of gender touch on really core issues that come up a lot in the philosophy of religion. And they sort of divide people working in this area along familiar lines, usually, not always, but usually. So I guess that's why. It's just sort of the most recent skirmish and a very long-standing battle between different ways of looking at the world.
See what you mean? My own take on that is that it has something to do with Genesis and the way that the descriptions is that it's male and female, man and woman. And because these categories are important, at least to most Christians alive today, it may not be in the future. I've actually got a hunch it might not be. But because of that, that would be an additional reason for the motivation behind, not necessarily your own, but why so many Christians are involved quite heavily in this discourse.
Yeah, I think you're right that Christians certainly have a stake in these sorts of issues. They have a view on what a human person is and what marriage is and what family is all about. So I think for that reason, it's interesting to Christians. But something I've noticed, which was kind of surprising, is once I started getting into this debate, I noticed that I had sort of ideological allies in surprising places. There are many, hardcore naturalists who have a kind of traditional view about what a man is and what a woman is and define it in terms of biology. So I know you've noticed that with people like Richard Dawkins. Maybe you probably know better than me, but it seems like this issue has sort of split the atheist community. And there are some people who go the way of I think we could lump Peter Boghossian and Colin Wright and Richard Dawkins into this camp. So I've found myself sort of allied or like-minded with people who I would normally disagree a whole lot with. But yeah.
Yeah, because you have a paper, don't you, on naturalism and particularly evolutionary arguments that relate to it. So, but in this case, you're like, no, I would sit quite happily with these naturalists because they affirm the same position that I hold.
Yeah. So for some reason, there's a particular kind of naturalist who answers questions on the philosophy of gender in the same way that I'm inclined to. And then also there's, like radical feminists in this mix too. So yeah, there's a very kind of surprising alliance between people like radical feminists, hardcore naturalists, and then Christians or Catholic Christians like me. And then yeah, there's a similar kind of surprising alliance on the other side, I suppose. But yeah, I think I did not see that coming. Like when I started arguing on the internet 20 years ago or so, I did not foresee that in the year 2024, I'd be talking about philosophy of gender with my allies, the hardcore naturalists and the radical feminists.
No, I appreciate where you're coming from, and you're absolutely right. It is a wedge issue, if you will, if you could even call the atheist community a community, because we're united in the sense that we don't believe in God, don't believe in gods, if you want to put it that way. But yeah, it is very much a contentious issue. You went on Capturing Christianity, that's Cameron Bertuzzi's show, to object to my view on gender, particularly statements that I had to say when speaking with Forrest Valkai. And that's, for everyone watching, that's how this conversation has come about. Thomas and I have went back and forth with a couple of messages, and we've decided, okay, let's flesh this out in a conversation. Let's try and do our best to get to the roots of the issues in my view, the motivations in my view, the motivations in the more quote-unquote traditional view that Thomas upholds. But no, I just wanted to really begin by saying that I really appreciate your calm and respectful demeanour on this contentious topic, because you're right, it is a very loaded and contentious topic. People throw names out and dismiss people out immediately. So just, yeah, I appreciate it.
All right. Well, I appreciate the way you approach the topic as well. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
One thing that I think might be useful, because of the context of the conversation at the moment, not so much of what my view is or what your view is, but just in general, is would you mind succinctly presenting what the self-ID view is and why you disagree with it?
So I mean, my understanding, having worked in this area for a few years now, is there seem to be three camps, or like three sort of positions in logical space that sort of attract people. And these positions roughly correspond to like positions in time. I mean, roughly correlating with like the three waves of feminism, you might think. So there's one view on which what it is to be a man or what it is to be a woman is defined in terms of biology. So a woman is an adult human female, a man is an adult human male. So my reading of all like the documents in first wave feminism is that was just sort of assumed. That was taken for granted. That's what a woman is, adult human female. And this is the kind of view that I found myself holding up until like 2017 or 2016 when I started thinking about this. I sort of came into the debate with that view. This is the sort of view that I mentioned some naturalists are attracted to, some radical feminists are attracted to. So on that view, these gender terms, man and woman, are defined in terms of biology. Another view defines these terms, man and woman, in social terms, or in terms of a social position. So just on one common way of fleshing that out, a woman is somebody who is subordinated or oppressed because she's observed or imagined to be female. So it's built into the meaning of the word woman that there's subordination or oppression. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So my understanding is there was kind of a splintering that happened in second wave feminism, and some feminists went this way. It's kind of inspired by a sort of Marxist analysis of class division, tension between classes, and we have woman as a social class. It's the class that's being oppressed in a system that they call the patriarchy, and men are the oppressive class. Okay, but it's just analyzed in terms of social position. So it's a social class idea. Okay, the third position, the third view in this logical space is a kind of psychological account. So what it is to be a man or a woman isn't a matter of biology. It's not a matter of your social position. It's a matter of something that's going on psychologically for you. And these folks tend to speak of gender identity, and your gender identity, we're told, is your internal sense of your gender. And then when you ask them, what is your gender? I myself have not gotten like really clear answers to that. Often we just get the the terms given back to us. Like, well, you might internally sense that you're a man or internally sense that you're a woman. But then if you ask them, well, what is it to be a man? What am I sensing when I sense that I'm a man? And what is someone sensing when she senses that she's a woman? Yeah, for me, the answers have not been super clear, but the worry is just that it looks like we've gone in a circle. We were being told what it is to be a man, and that's to have a particular kind of gender identity. And then we ask, what is a gender identity? And we're told it's an internal sense. And we say, internal sense of what? And then we're told, well, it's your internal sense of being a man. And then we're kind of back where we started. So, I mean, that's just raises red flags for a philosopher. I mean, my whole career up until that point, like if you had heard that sort of definition given back to you, I think a lot of philosophers would have just said, we've made a mistake. Something bad has happened. We've gone in a circle. But I've had to think a lot more about circular definitions since getting into this debate because, yes, people like really, they don't give up at that point and they say, no, there is more to be said here. And what they're trying to do is, what people in the psychological camp are trying to do is respect everybody's self-identification. They want to give you a definition of man that allows everybody who thinks he's a man in. So if you think you're a man, if you sincerely believe that you're a man, then you gotta meet this definition. And the definition shouldn't include anyone who doesn't want to be there, who doesn't identify as a man. So we're trying to be like maximally respectful of everybody's autonomy or authenticity or self-conception. So if you conceive of yourself as a man, you better be in there. If you don't conceive of yourself as a man, you're out. You're not in there. So that's like a constraint on the project. They want to be maximally respectful. And if you ask them why, they'll say, well, something that Katherine Jenkins said in that paper that I mentioned was that failure, I'm trying to quote it verbatim, but I don't have it in front of me. It's something like failure to respect the self-identification of trans individuals is conceptually linked to transphobic oppression and even violence. I think it's like that. Conceptually linked to oppression and violence. And so Katherine Jenkins takes it as a foundational premise that trans women are women, trans men are men. Everybody's self-ID is correct. It's kind of infallible. Okay, so here's the problem with that view, I think. So what Katherine Jenkins does in that paper is she objects to the social view, the view that to be a woman is to be oppressed because you're observed or imagined to be female. And she points out that that view is not going to respect everybody's self-identification. There could be some trans individuals who aren't presenting as women yet. They're not being read as women because they're not presenting as women. And so they're not being oppressed because they're observed or imagined to be female. They may be treated, it may be that they're being treated as men. So they won't meet the definition proposed by the social role view. And so they'll be classed as men on the social role view, even though they themselves think of themselves as women. So that's just one kind of objection that Katherine Jenkins had to the social role view. So she's using this self-ID criterion as like a cudgel to object to other views. It says like, look, the problem is you're not respecting everyone's self-ID. Of course, I mean, it doesn't even need to be said that the biological view doesn't respect everybody's self-ID because your biology is not a matter of your self-conception. If you're an adult human male, you're a man on the biological view. It doesn't matter what you think. Okay, so I noticed that Katherine Jenkins was doing that. She was using this self-ID criterion as like a cudgel to object to other views. And then, of course, something philosophers like to check is, does your objection apply to your own view? And it looked like the objection that Katherine Jenkins was leveling at other views applied to her own view. I don't know if you want to get into that, but she tried to give an analysis of what it is to be a woman that wasn't just blatantly circular. She is sensitive to like circularity concerns. So she put some conditions on what it is to be a woman, and it was something like taking enough of the norms of femininity to be relevant to yourself. So you don't have to abide by the norms of femininity, but if you think that social norms like shave your legs, speak like this, sit like this, walk like this, all the kind of norms of femininity that we have, if you think that those norms are about you, if you take them to be about you, according to Katherine Jenkins, then you're a woman. Of course, the problem is that somebody might identify as a woman and not do this, might realize like, well, those norms of masculinity are really like for me. They're for people like me. They're for people like, they're about me. Even though this person identifies as a woman. And you could have somebody who identifies as a man, but is confused about what sort of norms apply to them. Maybe they're a recent immigrant and they're not sure what social norms apply to them. Could have cognitively disabled people who don't have a grasp on the norms at all, and yet we might want to class as women. So there are these sorts of objections to Katherine Jenkins' own view that seem to point out that that view does not respect everybody's self-ID. Okay, so that's what was happening at this point in the debate in like 2017, and then eventually I wrote a paper where I tried to argue that it looks like the problem is, it's sort of endemic to the whole project. The project is, let's try to define woman in such a way that it's going to necessarily respect everybody's self-identification. But the problem is, there's simply no trait that you can have. There's no property you have, no characteristic you have, if and only if you identify as having it. Whatever trait you pick, it'll be possible to have that trait and not realize that you have the trait. Mm-hmm. Or it's going to be possible to think you have the trait and not actually have the trait. One of those things is going to happen. Because it's just kind of it's a limitation of like the fact of human cognition, that we can take ourselves to be certain ways that we aren't, and we can be certain ways without noticing it. So what I tried to argue in a paper, I forget when it came out, but it was like, I think it was called Why the Trans Inclusion Problem Cannot Be Solved. And what I tried to argue was literally whatever the word woman means, it's going to be one thing to be a woman, and it's going to be something else to take yourself to be a woman, to identify as a woman. So, the problem isn't, the circularity problem is, it's at least this: when people tell you that a woman is anyone who identifies as a woman, that doesn't convey to you the meaning of the word. It doesn't help you understand what the word is, for sure. But something I've had to think about is, it may nevertheless be true. You can get true statements like that don't help you understand the meaning of a word, but which nevertheless are true. So just for example, like a pencil, it is anything that is a pencil. Something's a pencil if and only if it's a pencil.
Yep.
That's true. Who could object to that? But of course, if somebody didn't know what the word pencil meant, that wouldn't help them understand it. Mm-hmm. Or maybe here's a better example. Here's kind of an obscure word. Catamount is an English word that is intentionally obscure. And if you asked, what is a catamount? And I said, well, here's a fact about catamounts. Something's a catamount if and only if it's a catamount. What I've told you is definitely true. It's got to be true.
Yeah.
But it certainly didn't help you understand what a catamount is. It didn't really reveal to you the nature of catamounts. A catamount, by the way, is a cat of the mountain. It's like a mountain lion or a bobcat or something like that. So when somebody says a woman is anyone who identifies as a woman, like that doesn't help me understand what it is to be a woman.
Yeah.
But the problem is it may nevertheless be true. And so what I tried to argue in that paper is, I don't know what the word woman means. I don't know what they're trying to tell me that it means, but literally whatever it means, that biconditional could not be true. There just is no characteristic that you have if and only if you identify as having it. So that's what I see as the problem for the self-ID view.
No, well, fair enough. I actually found, when I was getting myself into this discourse, I found your work useful. I think that you do a very good job of articulating yourself. And although I do disagree in areas, I do think that on this topic of self-ID, you've got it down. Like one of the ways that I would convey it, I've been trying to get it to a succinct distinction, because a lot of people think, Steve, you're pro-trans, like, you want to make society so it's accommodating to them, therefore you're self-ID. Like, we're probably going to have a situation where there's going to be a few comments below saying, something along the lines that implies that I have a self-identification view when I don't. But I found particularly that there's a descriptive element which we have an issue with, and that is that it just simply isn't the way that gender terms are used. I don't think that the self-ID view does a very good job at all at describing the way that gender terms and what gender is in general. And then also you have the prescription. And I think that what they're doing is exactly as you conveyed. They want to maximize respect and decency and empathy. And so what that means is that they can't put down definitive positions. Consequently, they've broadened it to such a degree that it doesn't actually convey anything. And so that if you want that position, I would just say go for abolitionism, because the word isn't meaning anything at that point. But yeah, no, I appreciate you unpacking that, because that's certainly an area of agreement that we have.
Yeah, I noticed that as well when I was watching your videos. And so I thought that I wanted to say this at the beginning of the video. Something that I've noticed about your views and that I respect is that you're sort of taking fire from both sides, you know.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm sure you've noticed that you are taking fire from both sides. So I think that's like evidence of a genuinely independent mind or a free thinker, right? You're not just falling into line. Battle lines certainly have been drawn. Each side is kind of like they've dug in. They're in their trenches and they're kind of firing at each other. And so it takes some real intellectual courage to be in the crossfire and say hold on, you have a point and you have a point. And so I imagine that's not a very comfortable place to be. But as I said, I think evidence of a genuinely free thinker and an independent mind, because so you don't accept self-ID as a criterion of gender identification or gender ascription. And you do say things about biological sex that sound like you're in the sort of traditional camp, what I'm calling the traditional camp, the biological camp. So you say things like sex is real, sex is binary. I don't know if these are still your views. Maybe you want to modify the views, but
sure.
And you say that it's important in some social circumstances to actually segregate by sex, like when it comes to sports. It's important to segregate by sex.
Yep.
Okay, so far it sounds like people in the biological camp are cheering at this point. But then other times you say, well, if we're not sure what gender a person is, we should just ask. So as a matter of empathy and respect, we should defer to their gender self-ascriptions. And you give arguments against the biological view that women are adult human females and men are adult human males.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you give arguments against that view. So yeah, you're in the middle.
I'm certainly in the middle, and no, I appreciate the kind words. Yes, I would say that what I do, when I got into YouTube, when I got into just thinking about theism, that's the main place I started. I told myself I will always stick as much as I can to my intellectual leanings and understandings. I won't lean into the tribalism, and I've had the opportunity to do it. There was a point where I was getting crushed and being called anti-trans and all the rest of it, and I could have very much lent into that and probably been one of the more pioneering figures in the current movement, which is anti-trans. And then likewise, I could have went the other way, but for me, it's just you know what? I'm going to go with the terrible business model and just to piss off everyone. So that's my plan. It's basically like being a vegetarian. You get to make enemies on both sides. So yeah, it's pretty wild. Right.
Well, I don't know how it's been for business, but I was just going to quickly speculate. I would have thought that it's attractive to a lot of viewers. People really can recognize that authenticity and that sincerity, and that you're really genuinely trying. No, they don't.
It's not. No, dude. Honestly, every time I have a nuanced view like this on a topic, I say nuanced, something that doesn't fall into a camp, my Patreon drops 40%. It's really not a good mode. Most comments are negative. It's not a good idea. But if what you care about is truth, and that's what I care about, then you just got to call it as you think. And I think that the self-ID people have got it wrong, and I also think that the people that say a woman is an adult human female have got it wrong. And I figure that might be a good place for us to get some definitions on the table, just briefly, I guess, where you can have your view up and I'll have my view up, and then we'll go through some use cases, including some brilliant ones that you mentioned on capturing Christianity, which I think will be really useful for seeing how our views deal with those circumstances. So if you're willing and able, can you please give me your definition of gender, man, and woman?
Yeah. Well, let me just start by making a distinction. And you mentioned it in your last comment. You said you made a distinction between a descriptive project where we're trying to capture what words actually mean as they're currently being used, what words actually refer to, and then you said there's a prescriptive project we might be engaged in, where we try to recommend new uses of words.
Yeah, I can quickly expand on that if that's helpful. I've got a really good example. Forgive me for interrupting, but the word literally, I can describe to you what the word literally means, and unfortunately, I'm going to tell you that it means figuratively, because that's the way that people use it.
Yeah.
However, I have a way that I want it to be used, and it doesn't involve that element, because it negates the very purpose that we have the word in general. Likewise, you could think the same if you wanted to describe race relations in the US. There's a description for what that is, and then there's what you want it to be, and the same is true of gender.
Yeah, I think literally is a good example. People who know more about linguistics than I do could give you a better analysis of this. But my understanding is there's a lot of words where the word has become its own antonym. So words like peruse, if you look it up, it can mean like casually browse. And that's how I always used it. But then I come to find out there's also a sense, if you look in the dictionary for peruse, there's also a sense in which it means carefully read, like do a close reading. And the word cleave is like this. Cleave can mean to like separate, like a cleaver. But like there's that verse in, I think it's Genesis, where we're told that a man and woman will cleave to one another and become one flesh.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, the word also means to like unite. And so I guess what we've seen in our own lifetime here is the word literally has done that as well. Mm-hmm. It used to have a very clear sense where it meant like literally and as an actual matter of fact. But it has come to be, there's another sense in which it's its own antonym now, and it just means figuratively. So I guess that happened again. So far we've just been describing what's happening. Like some people use it to mean literally. Some people use it to mean figuratively. We're just describing how the English language works. But you might add, in addition to that, like we have lost something here by having a word become its own antonym. Like it was nice to have a word for literally. That just meant literally. And we've lost some like expressive power here. So sometimes language changes for the worse. Sometimes it changes for the better. I was thinking of, I guess, when all the astronomers told us that they're changing the meaning of the word planet for some reason.
Yep.
And so now Pluto's not a planet. I guess they had good reasons, and I guess this was an improvement. It was going to include too many dwarf planets or something. So I get it, but I think we should recognize that they were engaged in a prescriptive project. They were saying, like, henceforth, let us use the word planet to express a new meaning. So now there are only 8 planets in our solar system or whatever. So yeah, sometimes these prescriptive projects are beneficial, and we make changes to our language that are beneficial. Sometimes changes happen in language that deprive us of expressive power. So anyway, the reason that's relevant to the gender stuff is I think sometimes when people have these debates, they lose track of which of those projects they're engaged in.
Yeah.
So when you asked me my own view, I was just going to tell you, like, I'll tell you the descriptive view first. I'll tell you what I think is going on with the words. And then maybe later on we could talk about, like, what we should do moving forward. What would be the most...
That is a really useful distinction, because I've actually made the assumption that the way that you describe it is the way that you want it to be, because it basically is in a line with Christian thinking. Yeah. If I'm mistaken on that, and in general, I shouldn't have made that assumption. So good point. That's important.
Yeah. Well, so maybe we'll hold that to the end. I'll just tell you descriptively what I think is going on. And I think that might like disarm some knee-jerk reactions that viewers might have. Like when they hear me say that I think the traditional ordinary use of the word woman or the word man, so the traditional ordinary use of the word woman is used to refer to adult human females, and man is used to refer to adult human males. Traditionally, ordinarily, that's how the word was used. Sometimes people's hackles are raised. They start objecting. But I think what they're objecting to is they hear me as like making a prescription, but I'm not. I'm just telling you, like, I think that's how the words have traditionally ordinarily been used. Some evidence for that, of course, it's not like conclusive evidence, but some evidence is just check dictionaries. And of course, dictionaries make mistakes. They're not infallible, but their job is to try to report how people ordinarily use words. Yeah. You'll find even to this day, like most dictionaries, the first sense of the word man is like adult male person or adult human male. So that's just some evidence that that's how the word was ordinarily used. Another line of evidence is we have similar words for adult males and adult females in other species that we care about and that we come into contact with, especially when their reproduction is important to us. So like if you're a farmer or a rancher or something, it's really handy to have a word for the adult male cows and the adult female cows so that you can track them and like monitor their reproduction. So we have words for like chickens like this, we have hen and rooster. We have boar and sow for cows, or sorry, for pigs, I think. Forget for horses, we have like mare, and then we have different kinds of males in the horse category. I think like stallion is like ready to go or something like that. But then there's like gelding, which has been castrated. I don't know. So we make even finer distinctions than just adult human male and adult human female. Sometimes we track like reproductive status. Okay, so we have a lot of words like this, and it makes sense, of course, if we're in the business of animal husbandry and domesticating animals and raising them and getting them to reproduce. Of course, it makes sense that we track these reproductive categories. And so the argument goes, surely we have even stronger reasons in the case of humans to like track these categories, because surely we have historically had an interest in the reproduction of our own species, and tracking the adult human males and the adult human females of our own species. So it stands to reason that we would have similar words when it comes to humans, and man and woman are the best candidates. Okay, and then just a third line of argument is like even trans-inclusive philosophers will admit that in dominant mainstream contexts, the word man means adult human male and the word woman means adult human female. Mm. They lament this fact and they want to change it. So then they like start the prescriptive project and say, let's do some conceptual engineering. Let's do some ameliorative inquiry. They call it, let's try to change the meanings of the words for the sake of social justice. Yeah. So I don't think it's super controversial. It shouldn't be super controversial to say, just as a matter of like historical linguistic fact, this is what the words have meant. Man means adult human male. Woman means adult human female. All right, so that's my view about those so-called gender terms. That's my like descriptive view. And then if you had asked, what is it to be male or female? I don't know if you didn't ask that, but if you wanted to ask that, I could tell you what I think those words mean.
Sure. I'd also like a definition of gender itself as well, if that's okay.
Okay, yeah. Well, let me start with the male and the female, and then I'll make a little note, come back to gender.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So the male-female stuff is fresh on my mind because I literally just submitted like a short book manuscript on this. I was trying to figure out what biologists mean when they talk about males and females. Yeah, because there is some disagreement among biologists, and even among the biologists who say that, to be male or to be female is defined in terms of gametes, sex cells, things like sperm and eggs. Even the biologists who say that are often unclear on exactly what the definition is. Okay, so I thought about it quite a bit, wrote a short little book about it, and I think that this is what biologists are referring to. I think that when biologists use the words male and female, it's something like when they use the word vertebrate. So they distinguish between vertebrates and invertebrates, but they're happy to call like embryos, like when I was an embryo or something, they would have said, well, this is a vertebrate embryo, even though I didn't have a spine, right? I had not yet developed a spine. And so what vertebrate must mean, and even if like, I don't know if this would be possible, but if we like removed the spine of, this is gross, sorry, but like, took a living vertebrate and somehow removed the spine, but kept it alive. This is really cruel and we shouldn't do this. This would violate like all kinds of research ethics. So just imagine it in your mind. Somehow the spine is removed. Okay, we don't have to do it. It happened naturally. It was a disease that happened naturally. I think biologists would still say, well, this is a vertebrate. It's just that the spine has like dissolved or degenerated or something like that. But it's still a vertebrate animal. If it was like a squirrel or something, like it's still a squirrel. It's still a vertebrate. It just lacks the spine. So I think words like vertebrate are referring to a kind of second order capacity or a second order function. To say that an organism is a vertebrate is to say that its genetic plan includes instructions for the production of a spine, something that's supposed to support the body. So even when it's an embryo, we can still call it a vertebrate because it has that genetic plan or that genetic program. It's sort of meant to, so to speak. Oof, I know that naturalists don't like this word, Don't like these phrases of like meant to or supposed to. Okay, wait, how about this? It's the sort of organism that evolved to produce a spine. Okay, so that's what makes it a vertebrate. So I think the words male and female are something like that. Scientists often describe embryos as male or female, even if an organism lost its testes or its ovaries. Like biologists still describe it as like a male or a female. So I think they're referring to a kind of second order capacity or a second order function. And what they mean is this is the sort of organism that evolved to, or was meant to, or has the genetic plan to, something like that, produce an organ or a component that produces sperm in the case of males, or produces ova in the case of females. So yeah, they're referring to like that kind of organism, that kind of body plan or genetic plan in the case of organisms where sex is genetically determined. It's a little trickier with organisms where sex is not purely genetically determined. So I'll just put a little asterisk and say more needs to be said in the case of like turtles and crocodiles, where it's a combination of genetics and environment that determine the thing's sex. But that's what it is. It's like a second order function. That's what biological sex is. So to be a male is to be an organism with a body that has the function of producing a component that has the function of producing sperm.
So is that testicles for male, sperm and
testes.
ovaries for women, but they don't have to necessarily develop the testicles. They don't have to necessarily
that process
develop
could
the
be,
ovaries.
Right, it could be interfered with or interrupted, and that sometimes that happens with cases of differences of sexual development. Could happen due to injury or disease, but nevertheless, it could be that the organism has that second order function. That's what, in the case of humans, that's what genetically it was programmed to do or supposed to do.
Yeah. Even
if something prevents it from doing that. Yeah. So that's what I think biological sex is.
Just to clarify on that, so with males, like if we don't, for instance, receive certain male elements in the womb, we will become a female because that's what we are by default. But if the SRY gene in particular sends this genetic plan and everything goes right, my understanding is then what happens is your body will actually produce the testicles will elevate your hormones, and so basically it comes down to the SRY gene, which has like a 99.9% correlation with chromosomes, which is why chromosomes is a definition that's used a lot for male and female. It sounds like what you're getting at is if someone has the SRY genetic plan, regardless of whether or not that plan actually goes through, that is what makes them a male. Would that be fair?
Well, I'd say in the case of humans, that would be probably sufficient for there to be this second order function. In humans, that's what realizes the second order function. That's what makes it the case that the genetic plan is sort of meant to or programmed to produce testicles. In humans, the SRY gene plays a crucial role, and maybe in other mammals too. But I'm sure there are other species where they do it genetically very differently than we do.
Yeah.
So that's why I think like the fact that there are males and females in other species suggests So I kind of came from a background in philosophy of mind, and in philosophy of mind, something that we recognize is it looks like creatures with very different brains can nevertheless have the same mental states that we have. So that's some motivation for the view that mental states like pain and pleasure and beliefs and desires aren't defined in terms of like any particular kind of brain state, but rather functionally, so that they can be realized by different kinds of brain states. Just in the same way that, here are some other functional concepts that we have. I was going to use quarterback, but that's like an American football thing. Goalkeeper. Or keeper in what you call football.
You call soccer.
So that is a functional concept. Yeah. So you could have a male keeper. You could have a female keeper. You could have a robot playing goalkeeper. You could have like a dog playing goalkeeper. As long as the thing functions in the right way, then it's a goalkeeper. Similarly with quarterbacks in American football, the concept of a quarterback is a functional concept. Okay, just one more real quick. The concept of a mousetrap is a functional concept. A mousetrap could be made of plastic, wood, metal, sticky, tape. There's all sorts of ways to make a mousetrap. The only thing that matters for something's being a mousetrap is it functions in the right way. It takes live mice as input, gives dead mice as output, something like that. Yeah, that's kind of I don't know if that's totally accurate.
So you've got ripping spines out, you've got killing mice. Like this is it's getting hectic.
I know. Philosophers are kind of notorious for, I don't know, having...
They do.
In every thought, in common thought experiments in philosophy, like people die. Like people get run over by trolleys. They get...
Yeah. Super chill, and then it's like, right, I've got to come up with a concept for this, causal finitism. Right, there's a Grim Reaper that's going to take the head off Fred. Like, bro, what are you doing?
Right,
like,
exactly. Right. Or, hey, let's all do ethics. Imagine there's a trolley about to kill 5 people. Okay, so anyway, so we've got quarterbacks, mousetraps, right. So these are functional concepts which allow for them, like mousetraps, quarterbacks, goalkeepers, to be realized by different kinds of physical substrates. So I think when you realize that, like, there are male nematodes, very simple little organisms are male, and there are male plants, like there are date trees, I think, that are just male, exclusively male. You got to realize, like, okay, being male isn't identical to any kind of like physical substrate, because a date tree is very different from me, and I'm very different from a nematode, and they're very different from each other. So, but nevertheless, we have something in common. We're all males. So whatever we have in common is probably going to be something functional, something that we're doing. And so in humans, the way that being male is realized may feature the SRY gene and testosterone and testicles and human reproductive organisms or organs and so on. But it may look very different in like a nematode. All that matters is the organism has a body with the function of producing some component that produces a small gamete. That's what makes something male.
No, that's useful. I appreciate that. I mean, when we're trying to compare with other animals, I find the entire project to be lunacy. Because, for instance, you might say, okay, males, they don't give birth. No, there's some males that do. That's actually the way that's evolved. That's the way it is. So, okay, well, males have the small gametes. No, that's also not true. So you end up finding yourself, okay, I need to do this with human specifics. And for instance, when you're making reference, it sounds like here with SRY gene, and where it gives the plan for the body to develop in a male pathway, there are instances, people with Sewer syndrome, for example, where where they are men without the SRY gene, and so their bodies are entirely female in the sense that they have a vagina, they have ovaries, like everything about them is female, and yet under your definition here, I guess that would make them a female because they don't have the SRY. Would that be fair? So this would be someone with a chromosomal male, but they don't have the SRY.
Yeah, one time I responded to a paper that was all about Swyer syndrome. I think that's what you were talking about.
Yes.
Right? I thought it was pronounced Swyer syndrome, but maybe they...
You're probably correct. I have a terrible way of mispronouncing just about everything. I'm surprised I can get Thomas right.
Well, I know that, I mean, when I studied a year abroad in the UK at the University of East Anglia, actually, and I remember taking biology classes, and like all sorts of things were pronounced differently, like skeletal system and urinary system, and it honestly took me a while to sometimes figure out what they were talking about. Okay, so let's see. I'm just reminding myself what Swyer syndrome is.
So it's like typical male 46XY.
Yeah. So what happens to the SRY gene? Is the SRY gene there with Swyer syndrome?
My understanding is that with this syndrome, what happens is you've got a 46XY karyotype, but they develop as female, and this is because the SRY gene, which is usually located in the Y chromosome and responsible for initiating and developing the testes, which then has the cascading effects for the other things, it's missing or it's non-functional. And so because it's not there, that's it. Like your body plan won't go, even though, but what I'm getting at here is that if your definition is that you need the plan in place, it sounds like that necessary and sufficient condition is that SRY gene. I'm trying to, if I'm misunderstanding you, then please do let me know.
Well, yeah. Well, in humans, like that would be the sort of physical explanation of why a human is male or female, the presence of a functional SRY gene or the absence of a functional SRY gene. That may be how humans do it. But I would just caution us against thinking that figures into the definition of what it is to be male or female. That would be like thinking that, well, the mousetrap I have here has a little like thing that snaps shut. And so that's what makes something a mousetrap, the spring mechanism that snaps shut on the mouse. So that's how this mousetrap catches mice, with the spring mechanism. But that's not required in order to be a mousetrap that it use that kind of mechanism to catch the mouse. There are other kinds of mousetraps. They're like the humane mousetraps that just sort of snap closed and then they're in a cage and you can take them somewhere else. And that's a mousetrap too. So I would say the same thing about a functional SRY gene. If that's what gets the process of viralization going in humans, then that would just be a sort of discovery of the mechanism by which humans become male. But it wouldn't be part of like the nature of what it is to be male, because I'm virtually certain that other animals and other plants do it differently. So it's not part of the definition. It would just be, in humans, this is how we do it.
Would it be sufficient to say that for humans it's a necessary and sufficient condition, or would that not be the case?
I guess it might be, I wouldn't say like broadly logically necessary or broadly logically sufficient. So it looks like what's happening in Swyer syndrome, just FYI, from what I'm seeing here, like reminding myself what this condition is, it looks like we've got a non-functional SRY gene. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, non-functional. Yeah, they have it, it just doesn't function.
Yeah, so it's sort of a...
You can have that is missing as well.
Yeah, okay, so maybe it just translocated, it's gone, it's not on the Y chromosome at all, or maybe there's a mutation in it and it makes it non-functional. And so it is a difficult question to say, like in a case like this, what sort of function does the organism have? Like what did this kind of condition evolve to do? If it's like a disorder of sexual development or a difference of sexual development, it's often like unclear what to say. And maybe there are other examples we could use. Well, I don't know. I'm super cautious because I know that like this affects the lives of very many people, and we should be really sensitive when talking about this sort of topic. So I'm just going to set aside intersex cases, DSD cases, and just think about other cases of functions. Setting aside intersex cases way to one side. We're not talking about them anymore. Just thinking about other kinds of functional concepts that we have. And so like there might be cases like this. Maybe, so here's another, well, we'll just use like a mousetrap example again. So maybe there's a factory that like makes mouse traps during the week, and then on the weekends the factory makes, I don't know, something else. What's something else it could make? Flashlights or something like that.
Maybe a device to rip spines out of creatures.
Okay, yeah, it makes the spine ripping out device.
Yeah.
No, it makes flashlights, which is super peaceful and nice. Okay. And it could be that like the machines that are used to produce the mousetraps or the flashlights, maybe like some weekend the machines malfunction and it produces something, and like we're not sure whether that's a mousetrap or a flashlight. It's like a combination of them. It may be hard to know whether it's a malfunctioning mousetrap or a malfunctioning flashlight. And it may even be that there's just no fact of the matter. Maybe there's no fact of the matter. But at least there's no fact that we can know. But I think in that case, there's only a few options. One is that it's a mousetrap. One is that it's a flashlight. A third option is it's neither. A fourth option is maybe the factory has done something pretty cool and made a device that's both a mousetrap and a flashlight. That's a fourth option.
There also is an intersex condition where some people are born with both ovary and testicular tissue, so they would be a good analogy there. I know you don't want to mention intersex people, but I very much disagree. I think it is the minorities that we need to worry about in this conversation. It's not one of the problems I have with this entire discourse is people essentially want to go, oh, it's minority, don't worry about it. We don't do that in any other domain of discourse. That's not a thing, right? So I'm not saying that that's necessarily the view that you were putting aside here, but like this is why for those watching, intersex people come up a lot, because if you're going to be talking about human sex, you better well encompass the whole thing, right? You don't want to just be doing, well, I can account for 90%. Well, no, if we've got a view that can account for more, then go with that one.
Yeah. So I for sure think you're right. And I hope I'm worried I gave the wrong impression. When I said let's set aside DSD cases or intersex cases, it's because I was about to talk about like widgets and gadgets coming out of a factory. And so I didn't want to
No,
lead
fair enough. If
anybody
I've
to
misunderstood you there, my bad.
Yeah, I didn't want to lead anyone to think that I was like dehumanizing these conditions or saying they're perfectly analogous to like widgets and gadgets coming out of a factory, or thinking that human sex is just like flashlights and mousetraps. So I know that sometimes people struggle with analogies, like a lot of viewers. So I don't know. In my experience, sometimes people take analogies too literally, and by literally I mean literally, and think that if I'm making an analogy, I think like the analogy holds in every respect. So that's not true. So just to try to preempt that confusion, I said, let's just set aside intersex cases, put them to the side, and just think about other functional cases and think about how functions work in a more straightforward case of like mousetraps and flashlights. I think even in the case of that factory, there's only 4 things that could be going on. Mousetrap, just a flashlight, both, neither. And so if our biological sex terms are functional in the same way as like mousetraps and flashlights, those concepts are functional concepts, then I think the thing to say about males and females in all of the plant and animal kingdoms, the whole in all of biology, not just humans, but all of biology, is to say that there are just 4 things that could be going on with any organism you choose. It's either just male, just female, both male and female, the way that something could be both a mousetrap and a flashlight. There are organisms that have the function of producing sperm and also have the function of producing eggs. That happens. So that can happen with organisms. And then the 4th option is neither male nor female. And so what I wrote in this little book, I think it is, as you say, important to think about intersex conditions, differences of sexual development. What I say is, in particular cases like Swyer syndrome especially, it can be hard to know what the truth is when it comes to biological sex. It can be hard to know, for sure. It's hard to say. But I think it's just one of these 4 things that's going on. It's these individuals are either just male or just female or both or neither. There's no third sex. So yeah, I try to say that because I don't want to get in the business of like, as they say in like among jurists, like hard cases make bad law. And these can be difficult cases. And
yeah, I've heard
so,
that.
Yeah, I think... Yeah, so we should be careful about interpreting difficult cases, especially when like it's so central to people's identity. All right.
I think that's a great line you raised. There's actually something that's come up with my definition, which we'll get to in just a second. But I want to make clear to everyone watching that it's not that I think that you should base the law around the rarer cases, but rather that you should damn well accommodate them. So this is why, for instance, we had this idea of what a mammal was, and then we went to Australia, and Australia being as weird as it is, I'm sorry, my dudes, but you are, you had this situation where you do have creatures that rip the spines out of other creatures. No, you had this situation where we come across the platypus, and the platypus is a very, very odd mammal, and we had to rethink certainly some of the necessary and sufficient conditions of what it is to be a mammal. And that's really all that I want to happen with gender. I just want to be able to go, yep, in the vast majority of cases, a man is an adult human male. But there are some other instances, and we should account for it. But just before we get to my definitions, and it's probably because I interrupted you, but could you just give gender? Like, what is gender?
So my understanding is, now, again, just engage in that descriptive project. The word gender was borrowed from like linguistics. I mean, if you've studied like French or Latin or German or other languages that are gendered, you've heard of grammatical gender. And we even use words like masculine and feminine to describe those sorts of languages. So my understanding was, I wasn't around when this happened, but I think what happened was, according to like a philosopher who was noticing this happen at the time, Willard Van Orman Quine, he said, these days there is more occasion to talk about copulation and coitus, like the actual sexual act. And so he said it was useful to have a kind of polite term to talk about this. And he says the word sex was like co-opted or recruited to talk about copulation and coitus. It didn't always refer to what we now call the sexual act. We used words like copulation or coitus or something like that. But he said sex was a more polite way of talking about that. So that word was borrowed from biology and like used as a verb to refer to the sexual act. And And then we no longer had a useful term to refer to the sexes. He thought, like, we used to just call those the sexes, but now that the word sex came to be used to talk about copulation, we needed another word to talk about the sexes. And he said, this was his report at the time, the word gender was like recruited for that purpose. And so I think originally the word gender was recruited to be a polite synonym for what we now call the sexes, male and female. And there are still lots of examples in ordinary usage of people using the word gender to just mean like the sexes. So on some like hospital intake forms, or when you apply to university or something, okay, maybe it's changed in the last 4 years, but it used to be like they might ask you, what is your gender? And then they give you two options, male or female. And it's pretty clear that they were asking for your sex. It was just, at least when I was in school, like if we ever saw the word sex, we would like giggle and we'd be like, ha ha ha. So gender was like a polite way of like asking, what sex are you? Are you male or female? So that's one sense of the word gender. And I think that was probably like, as it was applied to humans, that was the original sense. But it has taken on new senses. And I think this started around the 40s and 50s when people like John Money and Robert Stoller and so on were interested in thinking about what we now call gender roles and gender norms. These terms used to just refer to like norms that are associated with the sexes. So like we have certain rules or norms that we associate with females and that we associate with males. So Katherine Jenkins' example again was shave your legs. We kind of, at least in this culture, we associate that with females. Okay. But again, gender being a polite term for sex, instead of calling these sex norms or sex roles, we called them gender norms and gender roles. But then that got abbreviated, and now some people, when they talk about the roles or the norms, they just call that gender. And so sometimes the word gender is like the genus of masculinity and femininity. So we know what masculinity is and we know what femininity is. These are kinds of like stereotypes or norms or roles that we associate with the sexes. We didn't really have a handy term for what these two things are types of. And so the word gender was like recruited to name the type. Masculinity is a type of gender. Femininity is a type of gender. Okay, so sometimes gender is like names the type of masculinity and femininity. Sometimes gender names the type or the genus of man and woman, we're told. So yeah, I guess, I mean, it used to just be human, like a man is a type of human and woman is a type of human. But in like the last part of the 20th century, we started being told that these are actually gender terms. Man is a gender term, woman's a gender term. Perhaps boy and girl are gender terms, and maybe there are many other gender terms as well. And to refer to the type or the category, we say these are all gender terms. Yeah, so sometimes when people say, let's talk about gender, what they mean is they want to talk about what it is to be a man, what it is to be a woman, and then perhaps other categories as well, like gender queer, gender fluid, and so on. So certain kinds of neo-genders. Okay, and then, so that was 3 senses of the word gender. Polite synonym for sex, genus of masculinity and femininity, genus of man, woman, boy, girl, etc. And then a 4th sense, sometimes when people talk about their gender, they mean something psychological. So they're talking about like a psychological state that they have, which I guess more carefully would be called gender identity. And again, like the guy who originally coined this term, gender identity, I'm virtually certain it was Robert Stoller who came up with it. Is that right? I'm pretty sure that's right. If I'm remembering correctly, it was Robert Stoller who first coined the term gender identity. John Money came later. And what he meant was a person's internal sense of what sex they are. So he noticed that like at a certain age, kids started to realize, they started to know like, oh, I'm a male or oh, I'm a female. And so he called that gender identity. So again, using the word gender as like a polite synonym for sex. But since then, the term gender identity has changed its meaning, and it's no longer an internal sense of what sex you are. Now we're given definitions from like WPATH and the World Health Organization and etc., American Psychological Association, where we're told that your gender identity is your internal sense of your gender. And then when you try to figure out what they meant by gender there, it's often unclear and often circular. Okay. Or you get an incomplete list.
Yeah.
You're told like, well, here are some examples of gender identity: man, woman, neither, both, or something else.
No, yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's very explicitly like an incomplete list. So I myself am not totally clear on what this fourth sense is, but it certainly plays a large role in like contemporary trans activism. So that's why even a lot of like trans-inclusive philosophers are spending a lot of time trying to think about what this is, what this sense is. Okay, so if you'd ask me what is gender, I'd say the word is ambiguous. It's got these 4 uses. So if we want to talk about one of those, we should just specify which one we're talking about.
I guess what I am most intrigued in is which of those definition by your light best describes what gender is, because they're going to have different explanatory value for the data, right? And just as you're quite comfortable to say a man is an adult human male, I presume that there is one of those definitions that you actually would say, you know what, I think that this is the one that's doing a better job of explaining it. I assume it's the one that is essentially a synonym of sex. Would that be fair? Or
no? So the question was which of these best describes what gender is. So I think that there's an interesting kind of disanalogy between the word gender and other kinds of words that show up in philosophical conversations. So if we were talking about like God or something, or knowledge, or justice, or consciousness, or causation, these are terms that show up in philosophical conversations a lot. We kind of bring the concept with us into the conversation, and then we try to think about what the concept refers to. So we have a kind of pre-theoretical grasp of the subject matter, and then we're giving theories about what that thing is. So I might say like, well, maybe knowledge is just justified true belief. Oh no, get your cases. It must be something else. But we often start with like paradigm cases of the phenomenon that we want to study. We have a grasp of the concept, but we don't really know what its nature is. And so we're looking for like a revealing kind of analysis or definition. So when philosophers ask what is knowledge or what is justice or what is consciousness, that's what they're looking for. But I think the word gender is different in this way. At least in my case, I don't think I had like a pre-theoretical grasp when I came into these conversations. Like when I came into these conversations, I wanted to know what everyone was talking about because like I didn't really know. And sometimes when I asked like, well, what is gender? Some people would just say like, well, masculinity and femininity. And I'd be like, okay, now I know what you're talking about. Or some people would say like, well, I'm talking about men and women, boys and girls. What is the nature of a man? What is the nature of a woman? Okay, then I know what you're talking about. So it's a little bit different in that way. I don't think there was like one unified phenomenon that these are different theories about. I don't think it was like in the case of knowledge, there are like, internalists, externalists, there's people, I'm an explanationist about knowledge. There's other views about what knowledge is. These are all theories about the same thing, about the same phenomenon. And we're all giving like competing theories about what that is. But in the case of gender, I don't think there was like one phenomenon that these 4 senses are like theories of. I think rather what we've discovered is there were like 4 things going by the name gender. And once you like distinguish the 4 things, except in the case of gender identity, I still think that's kind of mysterious. But in the other cases, like I don't think it's very mysterious what we're talking about anymore. Well, I guess even in the case of man and woman, there is controversy over what that is.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to take back what I said. I think even in all the cases, there's controversy. Because even in the case of sex, there's like mystery about what the sexes are. Even in the case of masculinity and femininity, there's debates to be had about what that is. Okay. But these are like 4 different phenomena. So I guess if somebody asked me, well, what is gender really? I would say what we've discovered is the word is ambiguous. So just to use like a non-controversial case of an ambiguous word, the word mouse is ambiguous. I'm not like obsessed with mice or anything. It just keeps coming up. But like the word mouse can refer to this thing, and it can refer to the little rodents. And if you ask me, well, which of those definitions, little rodent or computer accessory, which of those best describes what a mouse is? I'd say it depends on what the word mouse meant in the question. Were you talking about rodents or were you talking about computer accessories? Okay, so similarly, if somebody said, which of those four senses of the word gender best describes what gender is, I'd say, like, ooh, it depends on what the word gender meant in the question.
I got you.
Yeah. So that's how I feel about gender. But I guess a further question is, like, if we're going to keep the word gender, like, I get nervous when there's so much ambiguity. I think it, like, muddles a lot of conversations, and people talk past each other, and people get upset because they misinterpret what other people are saying. So when there's this much ambiguity, like, as a philosopher, I get really nervous, and I think we should try to limit that ambiguity. We should disambiguate it. So I would say we should just stop using the word gender and just talk about these things. But if the question was,
okay.
like, well, we're going to...
A fellow gender abolitionist.
Well, yeah, but I don't know if I want to abolish... I definitely don't want to abolish biological sex.
No, of course,
I think
of course.
The word gender... I think it's doing more harm than good and creating more confusion than clarity. And I think that if you're going to have a conversation about these issues, it's best to just, like, specify which of those things you're interested in. So I noticed, like, in your recent conversations with Peter Boghossian and Colin Wright and so on, you were talking about the third one, typically. You were talking about what it is to be a man and what it is to be a woman. And I think, that makes my top four for sure. Interesting sense of the word gender. I think probably maybe the top one. I think that one probably matters the most for like legal and social conversations.
Okay.
Because so many of our laws mention men and women. So many of our spaces are segregated. They segregate men and women. So there are, like, serious social consequences having to do with that third sense. I'm also interested in the fourth sense because, like, I genuinely want to know what gender identity is. But I think probably the sense that you were talking about is the most interesting one.
Okay, fair enough. No, I think emphasizing the ambiguity of the word gender is really useful. Like one of the things I've done from trying to, get into philosophy, engage in philosophical discourse is, absolutely love it if there are clear definitions. But unless you're working in an analytical framework, the synthetic framework, it doesn't always lend itself very well. But there's this weird situation where most people still do know what you mean. And I think gender is one of those examples. They do tend to know what you mean, even though you really cannot give these clear definitions. It reminds me, the example I've given before is a castle. When I say a castle, you know what I mean. But if you try and get me to give you the necessary and sufficient conditions of a castle, it becomes really, really difficult. Another example is a hill. What's a hill? Okay, it's smaller than a mountain. Okay, what's a mountain? It's larger than a hill. Great. Like, this is really difficult things to pass, but this is actually how a lot of language works, and especially when there's a multiplicity of definitions on the board, as you rightfully point out with gender. Yeah, that strikes me as fair enough. It's harder to define than, say, your definition of a man and a woman. I do have one more question for your definition before we move on, if you're happy. But if you prefer, I actually get to my definition and then come back to yours. Is there a preference that you have?
I was going to respond briefly to the thing you said about castles and hills and definitions often being hard to come by. So I certainly agree. And that's why, like, I had to write this, like, short little book about biological sex, because although, like, biologists seem to know what they're talking about, like, when you ask them what is it exactly that makes an organism male, it is hard to say. And I don't think, okay, so I don't know if I got it right, and I'm going to kind of flatter myself if I say, like, I think I got it right in this little book. I think I finally figured it out. But that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to figure it out. And that's because it wasn't, like, already obvious what it was to be male and what it was to be female. Similarly, with all these other terms in philosophy, like causation and knowledge and God and consciousness. So it is very often difficult to state what something is, like, in other terms. Like, if I ask you, what is consciousness, but don't use, like, the word consciousness when you tell me, that's really tough. And, like, philosophers of mind have spent a lot of time thinking about it. So that often happens, especially when words are, like, philosophically interesting. And it's not surprising that it would be rare for us to have, like, one concept that's doing some work in our language that can't be duplicated using only other concepts. Like, why would we do that? That would be, like, redundant. If we could do the work of this word using other words, like, why would we have this word? I guess just to save a little bit of time. More likely is, like, we've introduced concepts that we didn't already have a grasp of using other concepts in our repertoire. So it's a little bit like tools in a toolbox, like we have tools in our toolbox that can perform a certain function and do a certain task that can't easily be duplicated by other tools in the toolbox, and maybe just can't even be duplicated at all by other tools in the toolbox. So I think like our linguistic toolbox is similar. We have concepts in there that can't easily be captured using only other concepts. And so I think you're right that like castle might be one of those. Another common example that people use in this debate is chair. You pointed out hill. There's a lot of them. They're all over philosophy. But I will just also quickly add that sometimes we do have concepts that can be defined just in terms of other concepts. Like at least in math and logic, like if you look for the
analytical
definition
frameworks.
Yeah. So if you look for a definition of like a prime number, you'll get a nice clear definition. If you look for a definition of circle, you'll get a nice clear definition, and it won't be circular. Oh, I didn't mean any kind of pun there. Won't literally be circular. Oh no, I just
go back to ripping spines out.
Yeah, right. Okay, so but you know what I mean. But even sometimes when we leave math and logic, sometimes it looks like we can define terms using only other terms, and it's a perfectly good definition. But it's hard to give you examples. But I would have thought at least this one, like things like hen, the word hen, that just is like an adult female chicken, right? That just is an adult female chicken. That's a hen. Rooster just is an adult male chicken. Now, of course, when you drill down and say like, what's an adult? What's a female? What's a chicken? That can be really tough. Yeah, but I think it's not very controversial to say rooster just is adult male chicken. Done. So similarly, maybe man and woman are like that. Maybe they are the sorts of rare concepts where we traditionally had like clear.
That's my gender from now on. I'm going to be a rooster.
Rooster gender. Okay, so that's what I wanted to say about cases like castles and chairs and hills and so on.
No, fair. I'm glad you bring up adulthood, because this is actually where my frustration comes with this more traditional definition, because what happens is normally, and this isn't yourself, but this is the dialectic, normally someone will come in and go, this is easy, a man is an adult human male, what are you doing? And what I want to do is go, what's an adult? And often what will happen is people will say, you're playing language games. Oh, I'm sorry, darling, but you're the one that's bringing up what's a woman, right? That's what normally's happening in these situations. So I am in my right mind, especially if we're trying to do, some rigid philosophy. We are okay to say, what is an adult? What are the necessary and sufficient conditions? But the question I have in mind here that pertains to this is that since you define a man as having the necessary condition of adulthood, that's a prerequisite, it's a necessity. What gender are non-adult males? Like how does that work? I'm not being facetious. I genuinely want to understand how that works under your framework.
So you mean the juvenile males, the non-adults, the pre-adults?
Yeah, non-adult,
the young males.
That's it.
Yeah. So if the boy is a gender term, right. So if boy is a gender term, then I guess they're just boys. We have a word for the juvenile males of our species, the boys.
Cool.
Yeah. But so I think a difficult question is like, well, what exactly is it to be an adult? And I saw you ask this of Colin Wright, and I've seen other sorts of like more empirically minded kind of hard-nosed naturalists bite the bullet a little bit and say, look, what biologists mean by adult is sexual maturity.
Yeah.
And so, like a 13-year-old girl who has reached like sexual maturity, who has started menstruating, is a woman.
Mm-hmm. Well done, Mohammed. You can go with Aisha. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. Yeah, I got you. So, so that doesn't sound right. I agree. That is not the way we ordinarily use the word woman. It doesn't look like we would call a 13-year-old girl a woman, except like metaphorically, or some like we might say like young woman, but I don't think we're literally calling them women there.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think what might be happening, well, I guess I would just say this. I think it is fine for people to say, I do not have an analysis of a term, but I think we all know what we're talking about, and here's paradigm cases. And then we could try to figure out what it is that we're talking about. And that's what we do with like knowledge, consciousness, justice, causation. If you want to have a conversation with a metaphysician about causation, they'll say like, things like this, and then they'll like break glasses and say, that's what I'm talking about. Let's try to figure out what it is. So it often happens in philosophy that we have conversations using words that we're unable to provide analyses for, and we don't know the real definition of this word.
I just want to say that's super useful, because to me that is just obviously the case.
Yes.
Like, that is the way that a lot of words work, and it's been very odd running up against a lot of naturalists, a lot of people like Colin, like, where they just want to like die on this hill.
Yeah.
And to me it's like, I don't get it. Like, we don't, this is fine. You can just say what you've just said. Like, that works.
Well, I think they feel pressured because like some people use the question, what is a woman, as like artillery. You know, it's like a weapon, you know, like you need to answer this right now. Yeah. And if you can't answer it, then you're like somehow stupid or like inadequate, or your theory's no good. So I think we need a little bit of subtlety here. Something that I've learned in philosophy is like, it very often happens that like we use words and perfectly well understand words without being able to articulate the real definition of the word. I mean, Socrates noticed that. That was his whole shtick. Like, oh, I see you using the word piety. What do you mean by piety?
Yep.
And then people would try to supply the definition, and inevitably they'd fail. Okay, so there's actually, I forget which philosopher came up with this. Might have been Peter Geach, but the term was introduced, Socratic fallacy. And a Socratic fallacy is the thought that if you cannot define a word, if you cannot yourself articulate the necessary and sufficient conditions, then you don't understand the word. You don't know what it means. So that doesn't follow. There are many words that we understand and use perfectly competently, like castle, like hill, like chair, even though we can't articulate the definition. We can't articulate necessary and sufficient conditions. Okay, so then what's going on in the women debates, and is it okay for like trans activists and trans-inclusive philosophers to just play this card and say, I know what the word means perfectly well. I don't have to give you necessary and sufficient conditions. So I think this would help clarify some of the debate. I think here's one disanalogy. I think a lot of the people on the trans-inclusive side are advocating for new definitions. At least a lot of the trans-inclusive philosophers admit, like, the traditional meaning was adult human female for woman, adult human male for man. We need to change it to a new, better definition, and then sort of reorganize society around these new, better definitions. So instead of segregating the adult human males from the adult human females, we're going to segregate on some other basis.
Right, yeah.
And in that case, I think it is reasonable to ask, like, what is this other basis? Like, what is the definition that we're going to use if we're going to segregate society in this new way? Could you tell me what woman means in the new sense that you're proposing? So I think, like, if NASA had said Pluto's not a planet anymore, there were only 8 planets, I think a reasonable follow-up is like, what do you mean by planet then? You know, can you tell me? And NASA was able to tell us. They were able to say, like, it's got to be like able to clear its own orbit or something like that.
Yeah.
Some sort of body, I don't know, massive body that can clear its own orbit around a sun. I don't know what they said, but they had an answer, right? So similarly, if people are proposing like a new definition of the word woman, I think it is reasonable to ask, like, what is it? What is this new definition? Whereas if we ask, like, of the definition that men are adult human males, if we ask what is an adult, I think in that case it is less suspicious or illegitimate to say, like, we all know what adult means. I can't articulate the necessary and sufficient conditions, but like, unless we're questioning the existence of adults, you got to just like let that slide. Like, we know what adults are. But I guess it is also interesting to think, like, what makes something an adult? And I don't think it's just sexual maturity for humans. I would just propose this. I think this might be closer. Maturity, like all around maturity. And so with simple organisms, like, sexual maturity just is maturity. Like, there's nothing else that they do. When they're sexually mature, that's it. Whereas with highly social creatures like humans and, I don't know, maybe elephants or great apes or something like that, sexual maturity is not full maturity. There are other aspects to, like, being a human or being an elephant or being a great ape that go beyond sexual maturity. So it's possible for a human to be sexually mature and yet not, like, fully mature, not mature all around. And so we wouldn't call that person an adult. So I'm not going to, like, die on the hill of what an adult is, but I think that's a closer approximation of what we mean by adult.
No, I hear you. And I actually think you're very much correct on what's going on there. And that is that they come into this debate essentially with a trump card that if your opposition can't give you a clear definition, this means that they're a fool. And so what that means is that they can't have the humility, and by my lights, to recognize that, no, their view actually also does suffer from this. It's just one layer down with what an adult is. Because if they wanted to stick to like a rigid thing, then when it comes to use cases, they better well be using that view, which they're not. They're always using a social construct view. And to me, like this, like, but as you know, when this is a contentious topic, like no progress can be made because it becomes very tribalistic and very... It falls apart in that sense. So yeah, no, that's useful.
I was just going to say, but you've probably noticed this too in philosophy, but one of the most disturbing things for me about studying philosophy was realizing like all these thoughts I'm having regularly just about ordinary things. Like as I look around the room, I just have thoughts about like spatial location and position. And when I think about ethics, I have thoughts about justice and whatever. I have all these thoughts. They're all using concepts that if you ask me what it is, like I can't tell you. Like the mystery is so shallow. Like if you just scratch the surface, there's just deep mystery. And that's really disturbing to realize like we're just skating along this thin ice over this like sea of mystery and ignorance. And so I think you're right. Like some people, when they like tribe up and they get entrenched in their little camps, and they like wield the what is a woman question as a weapon. When it's returned to them, they don't have the humility to say like, I don't have all the answers. Like, I don't know. I can't analyze that one for you. They trick themselves into thinking like, I need to be able to define all my terms all the time. And I guess something similar happened not so long ago when I guess like the tables had turned and all the right wingers were using words like woke. And then all the left-wingers were saying, what do you even mean by woke? Like, what is woke? You were just hassling me about what a woman is. Can you tell me what woke is? And then all the right-wingers were like, ooh, that is hard to define. So yeah, that happens. And I guess it just takes a little bit of philosophical experience to realize, like, sometimes we can define a term ostensibly with, like, paradigm examples. And we all know what the phenomenon is, even if we can't articulate the definition. Other times, maybe we are able to articulate a definition, and that's nice. But maybe we can all agree that if we are engaged in a like prescriptive project and we're trying to make the world a better place for the sake of social justice, and we're advocating for linguistic change, we should say what the change is. We should tell you like what the new meaning is.
Trying to figure out what the definition of woke was, because I've obviously because I get labelled it. I'm like, oh, well, what is this stuff? So I was doing some research into that. I've come to the conclusion it's basically progressive stuff that people don't like. So if they like something that's progressive, for instance, we've bumped the age of consent from 12. That's what it was with Augustine. That's what it was with Aquinas. We've bumped it up now these days because of advancements and discoveries. They like that, so that's not woke. But when it comes to, I don't know, gay rights, they're like, no, that's woke. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah, or like weekends, okay. I guess. We kind of like weekends. I guess that was once on the progressive agenda. Yeah, something I do, this is like totally an aside, but something I do in my class, I'm not a Marxist, just FYI.
I wouldn't have got that
something I do with my classes sometimes, something I do with my classes sometimes is like have them read like the Communist Manifesto, especially at the end where like we get the list of demands. And then like look through the list of demands and realize like, oh snap, we've gotten all of those, like not through revolution, but like through the ballot box, through gradual social movements. It's kind of eye-opening for them to realize like we're not like in the communist utopia, but they got like 8 out of 10 of their asks.
it is fascinating. It's like some people do say to me, they're like, oh, you seem to lean left on social issues. Do you on Marx? I'm like, no, I don't like Marx much at all. But I do think his theory of alienation's pretty good. And I do think that he's got it right on a lot of social issues. And hence that's why you've had this movement towards those. But that's another one of those contentious topics where you're either on one camp or the other. If you have a nuanced view, you're a bad man. Yeah. Okay, so we can't clearly define what adult is. However, there is a category of adulthood, and that is a necessary condition for being a man and a necessary condition for being a woman. And so then you have boys and girls, as you mentioned. Are boys and girls a different gender?
I remember, I don't want to use the word gender at all. So I don't really view myself as in a position of like adjudicating disputes about what is a gender and what isn't a gender. I don't have strong, I'm going to use the word intuition, but I don't just mean hunch. I mean, like when we do philosophy again, like when we're talking about knowledge, causation, consciousness, I think we can have rational intuitions there, and we can realize that like A lucky guess that happened to be true is not knowledge. And that's not just like a hunch. We sort of see it in the way that we see, like you couldn't have a square circle. 1 + 1 couldn't be 3. A lucky guess that just happened to be true isn't knowledge. Okay, I get it. I don't think that I am in a position to have like intuitions about using the word gender, because like I'm not totally sure what we mean and what it is. If instead you asked, like, are the terms boy and girl, do those name like masculinity and femininity? I would say no. No, to be a boy is not just to be masculine. To be a girl is not to be feminine. You can have masculine girls and feminine boys. So I think there I could have a rational intuition. But if you just asked me, like, are these gender terms? I'm going to say, like, I don't totally know what you mean. They're not sex terms, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
Although they're defined in terms of sex, there aren't, like, boy nematodes, except, like, speaking metaphorically, where really what we mean is just male. The sex terms are male and female. Yeah, boy and girl.
Yeah, that's intriguing, because if you've got it so that woman is a sex term and it's got 3 conditions and one of those conditions is sex related.
Yes.
But then you have it so a child isn't related to sex, and yet half of the conditions that must be met are sex related.
Well, let me just I was going to stop you at the beginning when you said woman is a sex term. So it's not merely a sex term, because there's adult and human in there as well. Like you also have to make
that's what I mean.
about,
33%.
Yeah, it's 33% a sex term. But it's not just, it's not entirely a sex term. There's also information about maturity that's encoded in this word, and information about species that's encoded in the word. So it's not just information about sex.
Of course.
So I might have said earlier, like the biological camp sees woman as a sex term. I don't know if I said that, but if I did, let me take that back and say it's like 33% a sex term. It's defined in terms of sex. But it is not itself, it doesn't just name a sex.
I guess what's interesting to me is that you have this situation where a woman with 33%, let's say, is a sex term, whereas you can have a child where 50% is actually explicitly mentioning female, and yet it's not a sex term. That's
I think it's still 33%. A girl is a juvenile female human. So you get maturity information, juvenile, you get species information, and you get sex information.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. Okay, fair enough. So the reason I bring this up is because a lot of people, when they're talking about adulthood and the way that is a necessary condition, by my lights, the entailment here is that despite them running around saying, I really don't like these people running around saying that there's more than 2 genders and that they can have non-binary people, that's actually implicit in their view. Because those children are not a man and they're not a woman. And so which is it? Is it going to be that they are genderless and thus they're non-binary? Or are you going to have them as a 3rd and 4th gender, a boy and a girl? And it seems that if you just do this philosophically, that is what is entailed by it. And I'm wondering, like, do you think I've got that one wrong? Or
no, I think you're onto something. Like if somebody really was using the language of gender terms and they said, yes, I agree, man and woman are gender terms. And then in addition, that person said there are only 2 genders. I think they would be in trouble because, as you mentioned, like there are boys and girls who aren't men or women. But then also we've got similar terms for other species, as we've said, like hen and rooster and boar and sow and duck drake for male ducks. And I don't know what the female ducks are. I forgot. Yeah, I was going to say doe and buck as well. Okay, so we've got all these terms that name the adult males and adult females of other species. If man and woman are gender terms, then, gosh, I guess those other terms are gender terms too. And then we've got like a lot of genders. So yeah, I guess what you're pointing out is don't hold these 2 combinations of views. Man and woman name genders, and there are only 2 genders, period. Like, in the world. don't hold those 2 views. Or even among humans. Yeah, I guess you'd have to say there are more than 2 genders even among humans. But I would think that the person who says there are only two genders probably is trying to express that there are only two sexes. I think they're using gender as a polite synonym for sex.
But then there's like this messy situation for when they're trying to define what a woman is. They're using those terms, and so they're like, this is where coming at this philosophically, I've realised, holy crap, these words I've been using the whole time actually have really weird entailments if we actually try and get these definitive views, especially as what's being expressed by them. And yet they don't seem to be recognizing this issue. So this either means that I've got it wrong or they've got it wrong. You see what I mean?
Well, can you tell me again what the bad entailment is? The bad entailment is if man and woman are gender terms, then there are more than two genders? Is that it?
Yes. So if you're going to say that these are the necessary and sufficient conditions for the two genders that we have. The first one is man, and it's human, adult, male. And the second one is human, female, adult. I can then just say, well, what do we do with non-adult males and non-adult females? And if you're saying there's only two genders, then what are they? They're non-binary. Yeah. But if you want to say that actually they are gender terms, you can't say it's a man because they are defined with the very attribute which makes us through that they cannot fit into that category.
Yeah, right.
You've done it analytically, let alone synthetically.
Yeah, okay, I think I understand what you're saying. So you're saying the person who says we've got two genders, man and woman, those are the only two genders. Man is adult human male, woman's adult human female. Then the question naturally arises, what do we say of boys and girls? And you had suggested, looks like they're non-binary. Well, if there's just this gender binary, man and woman, and that's it, and boys are not men and they're not women, then yeah, they're not on the gender binary, I guess. And so I guess they're non-binary. I guess so are pencils, right? These would also be not on the gender binary. So yeah, I guess the person who holds that view, this little bit of Socratic dialogue you might walk them through would help them realize they have some inconsistent views that they need to work on. And again, I think probably what they were trying to say was, if we've got like an angel on the shoulder and the devil on their shoulder who's kind of arguing with them, if I were to suggest something on their behalf, what I would say is, oh, shoot, that made it sound like I thought you were the devil on their shoulder. Okay, if we've got a...
No, I'll be that. Trust me, I've argued enough with Christians to gladly take the seat.
Okay, we've got like the prosecution and the defense, and you're the prosecution saying, look, you've got...
That's like, worse, my dude, that's worse.
Okay, you're a lawyer on this analogy. Oh, no.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that's even worse than the devil. Okay, whatever. If I were to say something on their behalf, what I would say is probably what you meant when you said there were two genders was there are just two sexes. That's what you were trying to say. And you were one of those people who was using gender as a polite synonym for sex. In this other sense of the word gender, where it's whatever terms like man and woman, whatever those name, whatever they have in common, there's probably more gender terms than just those two. Yeah, so we just have to be pretty clear on what we mean by gender. So I guess this might be another illustration of how like this word gender is causing more confusion than it's helping with.
I guess I can dot the I's and cross the T's on that by saying that I actually don't think that this is the problem with the word gender. It's actually a problem with how they're defining adult human female as a woman. Like it's not like a gender problem by my lights. It's just following from them giving these three necessary and sufficient conditions, which you have for the view that you have a preference for, or the one that you think better describes the data, and it just is entailed by that children cannot fit that category, and thus they are either a third or fourth gender, or they are non-binary. That seems to be the strict entailment of that. So I think it's...
Set aside words like man and woman. Just think about a person who says there are just two genders, adult human male and adult human female.
No, sorry. Oh. No, it's for the person that says a woman is an adult human female. A man is an adult human male. Because they've provided these three conditions that must be met for manhood and womanhood, in their schema, in their understanding, they have to account for, of course, those that don't fit it. And there are people that don't fit it, and namely children. And so now they might call it a boy or they might call it a girl. But in any case, they need to now decide, is that a third and fourth gender, or is that non-binary? You see where I'm coming from?
Yeah, so I think the person who says women are adult human females and men are adult human males, somebody like me, should acknowledge that there are humans that are neither adult human males nor adult human females, and boys and girls are good examples. And so if such a person said, those are the two genders, adult human male and adult human female, then yeah, we've got, and that's the binary, adult human male and adult human female, then yeah, such a person is in trouble. Yeah, because now we've got juvenile females and juvenile males who aren't on the gender binary.
So, which is it? What are
they?
I
think that person, such a person, should just give up the view that...
Aren't you such a person? Like, don't you hold that view?
Yeah, I think the word woman as it commonly is used refers to adult human females, and same thing with man, or similarly with man, it refers to adult human males. But I wouldn't have said those are the two genders, and those are the only two genders.
So would you be someone that says there's 3-4 genders?
Well, so I try not to use the word gender, but if I would follow up and say, well, what do you mean by gender? And if you had said, I'm talking about the genus of words like man, woman, boy, girl, hen, rooster, drake, whatever, doe and buck. Then ask me how many genders there are. I'd say there are very many. If that's what you mean by gender, then there are very many.
Okay.
And I guess I would allow that. Like, if that's what you mean by gender, you're asking how many gender terms are. I guess there would actually be more if we just countenance other languages, right? Because there are terms in other languages that name the adult human males and adult human females. So if we're just counting terms that refer to males and females of a particular species that distinguish between age, there are many such terms. And if those are the gender terms, there are many such gender terms.
Okay, cool. That's really useful. I'll switch up to my definitions. And actually, one thing that's been so useful about having people like yourself and Colin Wright and others engage with my view, and I pretty much read all the comments. So I read all the comments on Capturing Christianity. Most of them I can just ignore, but there were some decent ones in there. Likewise, read the comments on Peter Bogosian's channel, so I can get a better idea of how to articulate myself. Consequently, I have actually thought of a better way of expressing my views on these matters, and so I'll get them on the table for us.
Okay.
I do agree with you that gender is... In fact, I'm going to reiterate what you said earlier because I think it's such an important point. What I'm doing here is a descriptive enterprise. I'm describing what I think gender is and how society has used it and still use it today. This isn't how I want it to be. I actually think that gender, I'm similar to yourself in the sense that I want to kind of do away with it. I don't think that it's particularly useful. You still need categories for men and women in terms of male and female if you want to go through the definitions in that sense, but in the sense of... Anyway, you get the point. It's a descriptive enterprise. Earlier, you were speaking about newer definitions and how they're trying to replace the older ones. With mine being a descriptive one, I don't think that that's what's happening here. I think that the view I'm about to give it accounts for the data better than the one that you expressed, for instance. I think it does a better job of accounting for the data. So here's gender. I think that gender is phenotype, aesthetics, and behaviors typically associated with a particular sex. So I'm going to break that down a little bit because I've noticed that phenotype, which is what I think does the heavy lifting here, is something that's not... I haven't in the past done a sufficient job of explaining what that is. So phenotype refers to an individual's observable physical characteristics and traits, and they can result from the interaction of their genetic makeup and environmental influences. So, for instance, you've got primary sexual characteristics. These are the physical features that are present at birth, such as genitalia, so penis, vagina. You then have secondary sexual characteristics. These develop during puberty, and they include traits like breast development, body hair distribution, voice pitch, and muscle mass. And then you have body structure and shape. So general body proportions, essentially. So broader shoulders, typically in males or men, and wider hips in women. So there's my definition of what a gender is. If you want to ask any questions on that, that's fine. Or I can give you move on to what a man and what a woman is.
Okay, so your definition of gender was phenotypes, aesthetics, behaviors typically associated with... What was the last part?
With a particular sex.
With a particular sex. Okay, and then...
Yep.
Okay. So that's what makes something a gender. Phenotypes, aesthetics, behaviors typically associated with a particular sex. Let me think about that for just 1 second.
Of course. And while you're doing that, I'll emphasize what you said earlier, and that is that gender is a particularly difficult one to, because there's the multiplicity.
Yeah, so I think what you had said in previous videos, and maybe I think this is an improvement. In previous videos, you'd said phenotype, aesthetics, behaviors heavily correlated with a particular sex. So you used talk of correlation. And then I thought, well, there's going to be problems there because there are things like gamers or something like that,
Yes,
where they have certain kinds of aesthetics and behaviors that are correlated with males. I guess most gamers are males, not all, but most. But here you say associated with a particular sex. So I think that gets around the gamer problem, because although there will be, oh my gosh, I just learned, maybe everybody knows this already, but for some reason YouTube just showed me a video of people who get indentations in their skulls from headphones from playing games so much. Have you seen this?
Oh my goodness,
it was really terrifying. Well, I don't know if the skull changes. Yeah, if you look it up, it's pretty disturbing. I don't know if the bones actually change, but at least like the muscles change, and there's like an indent for sure.
Wow.
Yeah, so I guess that might be a kind of phenotype that is like associated with gamers. And I guess there's probably like aesthetics and behaviors that are associated with gamers. And if most gamers are male, then would it be the case that this sort of like gamer aesthetic, gamer phenotype, gamer behavior, does that count as a gender? Because those would be phenotypes, aesthetics, behaviors that are, well, I think you can get around it because those are those associated with males, I guess? Yeah. What do you think about that?
No, that's a great question. I mean, one of the benefits I actually find with this definition is it can actually incorporate more than two genders, because although it's saying a particular sex, it's sufficiently casting a net to tell you what it's about with aesthetics, behaviors, and phenotype in particular. But it does allow, for example, for the Hijra people in India, which they recognize as a third gender. So, like, the word gender to me is largely just made up by us, and because of it being made up by us, not entirely arbitrary. So it's like money's not arbitrary. It is actually it used to at least relate to alloys or to paper. These days it relates more to digits that you can get up on your phone. But like that, this is the way that I see gender. It does correlate. It's typically associated with sex, but there are cases where, you know, just as there are money that actually doesn't relate to alloys or doesn't relate to paper, there are situations where you could at least in principle and actually in practice with the Hijra people, you could have it so that it doesn't necessarily relate entirely to sex.
Okay, so it was the verdict there that yes, gamer does turn out to be a gender, but that's sort of a feature of the view, not a bug, that there are more than two genders?
It would be more that it's in principle a possibility, but it isn't the case, because that's not how societies have done it. We've been selected for our sexual dimorphism in humans is pretty extreme, and so it's not a coincidence that our aesthetics, behaviors, roles, etc. have went around the two archetypes that are related to male, female. So in principle, that's the case, but it's not the case in practice. Yeah.
Yeah, but my concern was there's a certain kind of phenotype and set of aesthetics and behaviors that that gamers have. The gamer phenotype, it might include the indented skull. It includes certain kinds of clothing and ways of cutting one's hair and behaviors like playing video games and stuff. Okay, so there's the gamer aesthetic. It's definitely correlated with a particular sex. It's correlated with males. So I guess most gamers are males. Probably. Oh man, I hope it's not true that most males are gamers, but it might. I guess I'm like showing my cards here. Yeah, I hope that's, I don't know. I think that people spend too much time playing video games, but I haven't played video games in many years, and when I was young, I played a lot of video games. All right.
You know what will do it, right? It's going to come down to how you define a game, because if you include mobile games and stuff like that, then all of a sudden maybe we've expanded it, yeah.
All right, so I think there's going to be a correlation between this gamer aesthetic and males, at least in this direction. Like, if you find a gamer, it's a good bet that person's a male. So we got the correlation thing, but I thought you were going to say... I thought the association language was an improvement because we don't associate being a gamer, or do we associate being a gamer with being male? I guess I kind of do associate it with being male. So if there is that association, then it looks like being a gamer meets the definition of a gender. And so it's not just like in principle possible for it to be a gender. It is a gender according to this definition.
In the 1980s, suppose you wanted to describe what a gamer is. I think then you would be on a better footing to say that it's associated with a particular sex. But these days, I know lots of females. I've got a lot of female friends, and they play video games. Yeah. And so what's happened is, as time has moved on, we've changed what we mean by that. But the way that I see gender is that it's pretty much like any other label, but it has its associated properties, which in gender's case tends to be sex. I would say almost in all situations.
Yeah.
So we could call a gamer a gender. It's in the same category in the sense that this is a description of a person that has, certain aesthetic qualities, certain behaviors maybe. And so we could call it a gender, but that's not what's doing the work here. Really, we're just giving them a label and going, that's what that person is.
Yeah.
This is what gender is to me. We're just going, right, this group of people are women, and it heavily correlates with their sex. Or that's the case it's certainly in the West and in the vast majority of cases.
All right. You could do this, which might just sidestep the whole like gamer question. Instead of talking about correlations and associations, you could just say a gender is like a set of norms. So norms are like should statements. Like, we have norms for police officers. Here's how a police officer should act. You got to read Miranda rights. You got to use not use deadly force unless it's required. I don't know. We've got all these norms for police officers. So norms are like should statements about what a certain category of people should do. And genders are the set of norms about the sexes. And then, like, if there are any norms about gamers, those aren't norms about sexes. They're just norms about people who play video games. If you play video games, here's how to do it. Like, I don't know. I was going to say be polite, but I don't think they're super polite to each other. Whatever the norms are for gamers.
So is a norm here what they should be doing? So it's prescriptive.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of people have thought of gender as like norms. Like if you have a little girl, what that means is, according to society, that's not to like advocate for these norms, but
yes,
society tells you, dress her in pink, put little ribbons on her, get her dolls. So there are all these rules about how you should be and how you should behave and how you should dress.
Okay.
Like shave your legs, as Catherine Jenkins says. That's one of the norms. And these are norms for females, for human females. And so there's like a set of norms for human females around here. Our culture has come up with a set of norms for females. In other cultures, they may have done it differently. But if you have a set of norms and the norms are about a sex, then that's gender. So then if you like sort of ditch the correlation and association talk and use the like about talk, then I think you could just sidestep the gamer question. And then it starts looking more like masculinity and femininity, at least for me. That's how I would interpret what you're saying. I think he's talking about norms about the sexes. But maybe you don't like the norm talk. But I was going to say this about your view. I was going to recommend this as like something you might say, which would help, I don't know, get you less fire from both sides. If you did define gender in terms of norms, then that's like more in line with a certain tradition tracing back to like second wave feminism, where the genders are defined in terms of norms that are imposed on you, that are policed, that you're kind of coerced to uphold. And it's like a restrictive kind of coercive sort of system. And so that's why you favor gender abolition, because...
Thomas, are you trying to make me a Marxist?
Wait, whoa! No, nobody said anything about economic classes, but it does have it has a structure in common with Marxism. We've got like an oppressing class and an oppressed class, but you could like ditch the Marxist hierarchy and just say there's been a kind of dispersed sort of biopower, as Michel Foucault might have called it. It's like dispersed, it's systematic, that's oppressing everybody. And these norms are being imposed on everybody. They're imposed on males and they're imposed on females. Everybody's getting coerced. Everybody's getting constrained. And the goal of like gender abolition is to like overthrow these norms, get rid of the norms, and let people be whatever they want to be all the time. But yeah, so if you build the norms into the definition of gender, then it makes more sense why you are in favor of abolition. Because if there's no talk of norms or imposition or coercion or anything bad in the definition of gender, then the question is like, well, why do you want to abolish it? After all, even in the utopia that you envision, okay, that wasn't supposed to be pejorative. Like I'm all for utopias too. In the perfect state of affairs, if I asked you to order society perfectly, in that state of affairs that you envision, there may be people who like want to be feminine or like who want to be masculine. And if you're really a gender abolitionist, then you'd have to like tell them, no, you cannot do that. Like no more gender, no more femininity, no more masculinity. You can't engage in any sort of aesthetics or behaviors that are associated with the sexes. So yeah, if you define gender in like a morally neutral way, then it's kind of surprising or odd to combine that with gender abolition. Whereas if like a second wave feminist, you define gender in like a morally loaded way where like being a woman is something like being a slave. And I've heard them define it as like being a sexual slave, and being a man just means being like a sexual master. Well then, yeah, abolition makes a lot of sense now because we want to get rid of slaves and masters. So that would be my humble recommendation. If you put some norm talk in there, then the abolition would make more sense.
Okay, so yeah, maybe I can help with that, because I hear what you're saying. So what I'm doing is describing it here, and what we would need in the description is a situation where, you know, you have a norm that's bad, and hence why I'm in favor of abolishing it. But what I'm trying to do with my definition here is encompass how every society sees gender. And the thing is that if you look at the West and you look at like the pejorative stuff, and you look at how women have been thoroughly mistreated, by my lights, you've got Christianity and religion to thank, and you've got also our natural disposition. Genesis, speaks of how women, the whole Bible is not particularly fond of women by my lights. And even when it's trying to be nice, it says they're the same but different. And when you look at the explicit justifications for why women have like not been able to teach in church or haven't been able to teach in schools, it's so much of the rhetoric is coming back to Timothy. And so yeah, you have all of these like norm elements, but then we might want to describe, I don't know, some tribe in Boa Vista, and all of a sudden our definition of gender won't work because it doesn't incorporate their view, and they might have an egalitarian view, but they still have gender. Or we might want to talk about, say, Hinduism. Well, in Hinduism, you could perceive of a culture, and there probably has been a culture where males are being mistreated, and you get the point, right? I'm looking for a definition that will actually not just encompass, say, Western concepts of gender. I want to understand gender per se. How do other cultures look at it? And that's why I'm hesitant to put in something like the norms the third wave feminism and feminism in general have written about.
It's just like tendencies or stereotypes. We can set aside the norm talk. Just maybe we can. What you're doing is like trying to give a kind of neutral description of stereotypes, roles, expectations that we have of the sexes. So whatever sort of stereotypes and expectations and roles there are that are associated with gamers, those aren't stereotypes about the sexes. It just so happens that most gamers are male. But when we have stereotypes of gamers, those aren't stereotypes of males. They're stereotypes of people who play a lot of video games. Okay, so maybe we can still get the like about talk without the morally loaded talk. We just have stereotypes about females, expectations of females, roles typically played by females. So I'm just hearing this as like what people commonly call femininity. So yeah, a gender is something like femininity and masculinity, and those are stereotypes, roles typically played by the sexes.
Potentially I could phrase it this way, because that's very helpful. The definition I've given is neutral on purpose, and it's because not every society conceives of genders in a way that does have like this norms that are necessarily negative to one or the other. There are some situations where no, that's not the case, but it still is phenotype that's playing the big element, or aesthetics or behaviors that are playing the big element for the differentiation, and it is based on that sex element, but it just doesn't have that normative angle.
Yeah, okay, I think I'm having a realization too. I think I might have been wrong when I said, like, why would you be an abolitionist unless gender terms are morally loaded and you want to get rid of the coercion and stuff? Maybe the idea is, in the utopia that we're envisioning, the perfect society, there will be no behaviors or aesthetics.
Yeah, that's it.
Or phenotypes associated with the sexes. There will be no stereotypes about the sexes. There will be nothing that like is distinctive of the sexes, because all of the sort of, I guess, like, nursing is dominated by females, psychology is dominated by females, engineering has more males. Okay, so we see this kind of like gender breakdown in career choices and interests. But I've met a lot of feminists who say this is the result of socialization, and if we stopped socializing people to be like carers for each other, then if we stopped socializing females to be carers, we would see fewer female nurses. If we stopped socializing males to be so thing-oriented, they'd stop going into engineering. And so in the gender utopia, where there's no socialization, there will be no aesthetics, behaviors, stereotypes, roles typically played by the sexes. It will be kind of like the sexes will be randomly dispersed among all these styles of dress, all the aesthetics, all the career choices. So maybe that's the idea.
No, because I don't think that that's possible. So like, I think that if you just take 100 women and you take 100 men, you will be able to get some statistical analysis on what they're likely to do. But it won't be helpful for saying 100% of men are going to be into UFC. No, it's not happening. Or gaming, right? 100% of women will not be gamers. No, you're going to get some. So really, what I want to do is aid in the breakdown of the category, which I do find to be very unhelpful, especially historically. I think it's been criminal to men, let alone women, and that is that it's put expectations, aesthetics, behaviors onto men, which has been catastrophic for mental health. And so slowly society seems to be recognizing this and stripping this away. You go back 100 years ago in the West, and there was a lot of expectations on men, which is not the case today. And so a lot of us look at it and we go, let's take these pieces off. These are not helpful. Yes, most men tend to be, broader in shoulder. Most men tend to be into sports. So what? Like, there's no normative element here. Get rid of this, get rid of that. And that's what essentially we're doing. But as for whether or not you'll get to the point where gender is completely, it is no longer a thing, I actually don't think that that's possible. But at least in principle, I think that that is a goal to aim for, because the less we're claiming jurisdiction over the experience of others and the more opportunities we give everyone, the better. I just think that's a better world.
Okay. Yeah, so maybe the thought is, if we fight against these stereotypes and expectations, then what we'll find is like parents will be less heavy-handed when like directing their children's upbringing and career choices. People will have more freedom and autonomy, and so we'll see a more even distribution of males and females among all the interests and career choices and life paths. It may not be like perfectly evenly distributed.
It won't. I would go so far as to say it won't at all. You'll have some areas where it is massively female, some areas where it's massively male. But the point is that you created a society that actually doesn't just assume and force men into roles that they're uncomfortable with, and the same is true of women. Okay,
so I guess we could... So in the gender abolition future that we're envisioning, there will be genders, I guess, but... When you say you want to abolish gender, what you mean is you want to abolish people coercing each other to live up to a gender, or to like conform to their gender or something like that. So I mean, in the gender utopia, I guess you think it'll turn out that, I don't know what percentage of UFC fans are males, but it's like a huge percentage, right? It's like 90-something.
It's huge. I'm one of them. It's also very right wing. I'm telling you that as well. Okay. So I'm one of the only liberals that watch it.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to. I know that like people like Jordan Peterson make a big deal out of this like Scandinavian paradox or something, where in Sweden and Norway it's like super gender progressive, but you still find like most nurses are female and most UFC fighters are males. Okay, so even if you give people maximal freedom and we're not socializing them or like coercing them or constraining their choices, they will just freely make choices, and you'll see like sex segregation among the different paths.
For sure.
So that might still happen. So when you say you want to abolish gender, it's not that you're hoping for even distribution of the sexes among all the interests. You know that that's not going to happen. What you want to abolish is like the coercion and the...
Put it this way. If someone says Thomas is a man, I want it to be to the degree that I cannot make any decent assumptions about you at all.
Okay.
I can make some inferences that are statistically likely,
Yeah.
but that's it. And I think that that's just going to be a better world.
You shouldn't have thoughts like he ought to be stoic or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Stoicism is a great virtue, but it's also very bad, and some men
so
flourish from it. Maybe most men, but not everyone.
So you want to cleave off in the cutting sense. You want to cleave off the norms, or the expectations. And you might say like, well, if I had to bet, I bet he's into UFC or something. Or I bet that he's kind of stoic, but it's up to him to decide how to be. I'm not going to like foist any expectations on him.
Yeah. Whereas if you go back 100 years ago and you know that there's a bloke, you could have immediately have said, this person's in a heterosexual relationship, whether they're homosexual or not. And you would have been right. Like, because society had those expectations.
Yeah. So in your view, there are genders, and then in addition, there are like gender expectations. So we kind of like force these genders on kids. We're like, you need to live up to these stereotypes.
No.
You need to be like this. And what you want to abolish is the expectations.
Yes.
But the genders may still be there.
If genders are still there, like you're abolishing everything that I'd care about. If that wouldn't count as abolitionist in some sense, I don't care. Like that would be fine by me.
Well, I think you're abolishing gender in a certain sense of the word gender, like the gender norms. You're abolishing those.
Yeah.
And some like second wave feminists thought like that's just what they meant by gender. They meant like this system of norms that coerces us. And so when they said they wanted to abolish gender, that's what they meant. But you're using gender in a different way, and now we're clear on what it is. And I understand why you would be an abolitionist in this sense. All right.
It's very useful you bringing that up because maybe it's better that you find a different way of conveying that thought. Maybe it isn't helpful to say I'm an abolitionist. Maybe that carries weight, especially in the context of a view that I don't hold. So
you could just say I'm a gender norm abolitionist. How about that? I want to abolish gender norms. You could say that.
A norm abolitionist. Yeah, that's fine. That works. Yeah. Okay, so returning to the descriptive view that I have, here is how that would be fleshed out when it comes to man and woman. So a man is a person whose phenotype, aesthetics, and behaviors are typically associated with an adult human male. And the reason I've added that to my definition is because it just conveys what I've been saying all along, but more clearly, and hopefully in a way that will resonate more with people that actually have adult human male in their definition. So likewise, my definition of a woman is going to be a person whose phenotype, aesthetics, and behaviors are typically associated with an adult human female. So there's my definitions on the board. Happy to move on to use cases unless you have any questions that pertain to those two.
Yeah, all right. So you had proposed this as a descriptive enterprise. You said, I'm just trying to report how people are generally using these terms. So we're setting aside the prescriptive project. We're not wondering like which definition should we adopt, what would be most useful for society. We're kind of engaged in the project of lexicographers writing a dictionary, and we're trying to figure out what people mean by man and what they mean by woman. So if that's the project, then I guess what I would point out is, couldn't there be a situation where there's a man who doesn't have the phenotypes, aesthetics, behaviors that are typically associated with adult human males, perhaps because there are no such things? Like, what if we achieved a kind of gender equality utopia where maybe through a combination of like coercion and incentives, we've eliminated any kind of correlations between sex and behaviors and aesthetics?
Okay.
Probably I don't know if we could get rid of the phenotypes. That's going to take some like surgical intervention or something. But imagine a kind of gender utopia where there are no gender norms. There aren't even any gender stereotypes or regularities. There aren't any regularities of dress. I would have thought that the way ordinary people use the word man, they would still say there could be men in that situation. Or maybe, gosh, another example that suggests itself really quick. This might be just a better example. In that, I don't know if we're still allowed to mention this movie. I think it's kind of like politically incorrect these days. But do you remember that Robin Williams movie, Mrs. Doubtfire? You remember that?
Yes, I do.
Where he's dressing up as a woman in order to like hang out with his kids because he's going through a divorce or something like that. Okay, I think in that movie the right way to describe it is he remained a man the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Did he have the phenotypes, aesthetics, and behaviors that are typically associated with adult human females? I would have thought no, like intentionally he changed his appearance, he changed his aesthetics, he changed his behaviors so that he had the appearance, aesthetics, behaviors that are typically associated with adult human females. He didn't have any surgery, but he certainly resembled and behaved like a woman.
See, I would say in that situation he had the aesthetics, arguably, and the behaviors. He definitely had the behaviors. You got to love his acting on that front.
Yeah.
But the phenotype, no, not really. I mean,
Okay.
everything in the movie would indicate that he had a penis. Everything would indicate that his structure and his all his sexual characteristics were still a man. This is actually a really good example that you bring up here for bringing in the aspects of where this is where the self-ID view would come in, and they would want to say, well, you know, the psychology is playing a part, but obviously that's not part of my definition. But I just wanted to note that for people watching, that is actually where the emphasis of that would come in.
The self-ID view gets the right result in the Miss Doubtfire case. The self-ID view says still a man because he identifies as a man. Just want to quickly add the biological view also gets the right result.
Yes.
But it looks like maybe there is a biological component in your definition because in order to have like the right kind of phenotype, you got to have a certain biological structure. And you said primary and secondary sex characteristics, right? So in order to be a man, you have to have testes?
No, it's rather typically associated with a particular sex. So in the case of a man, a person whose phenotype, aesthetics, and behaviors are typically associated with an adult human male. Because by my lights, there are some men that are not male. They're actually female. And by my lights, there are some males that are women, right? So like my view is inclusive in that sense. And that's something that I think with the cases we come up with in a second, I'll show you why I think that my view is doing a better job of the data. But yeah, you explained, you gave a scenario in a utopia, and then you was talking about my view, and I just wanted to add to that if we were in that utopian view, my description of what gender is would correlate with what that utopia is, and so it wouldn't be the definition I'm giving now. So when I give this definition, I'm describing what I think gender is. I'm giving you what I think is the best explanation for all of the data historically and contemporarily of what a man and a woman is. So if you change the circumstances of the world we live in, then I'm probably going to change my definition accordingly. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I hear you saying that if that gender utopia came about where there are no more behaviors or aesthetics, I don't know about phenotypes, associated with the sexes, you said you would use the word gender in a different way to try to report how these people are using the word gender. So I understand that. My thought was just like, well, you're currently trying to capture the way we use the words man and woman and gender. And we can think about hypothetical cases and ask like, are there men there and are there women there as we use the word now? And I would have thought that in that kind of egalitarian gender utopia case, there would still be men and women, but there wouldn't be anyone that like meets this definition.
Okay, so tell me if this is a fair parity. We have an idea of what a castle is, and yes, it's a bit loose around the edges, and I can't actually give you a definition that's going to encompass every castle, but suppose we go to castle utopia, and in castle utopia, we decide that castles are oppressed, and we remove all of the necessary and sufficient conditions of what we see for a castle, and all of a sudden, anything can become a castle. There's no expectations for it to correlate with anything, including the materials or anything like that. In such a case, you would have to change your definition of castle. Otherwise, you wouldn't be accounting for what castle is in that hypothetical.
Oh, okay. Well, I think what might be happening is we're imagining using the same term, but then like introducing a new meaning. And I think something like this happened with planet. So we use the word planet, when I was a kid, we used it with a certain meaning so that it was true that Pluto was a planet. We were picking out a certain kind of heavenly body, and Pluto met that definition. So Pluto was a planet, the way we were using the word back then. And then NASA comes in and messes everything up and changes the meaning of the word so that now Pluto does not meet the definition of planet anymore. So I think the way to describe the situation is the word planet has persisted, but it has two different meanings now. It has a pre-NASA meaning. Like when I was a kid, it had one meaning, and now it has a different meaning. So there's just ambiguity here. We've got one word with different senses, different meanings. So it's like mouse in that way. It's like the word mouse. So if that's what's happening, then I would say in your gender utopia, the thing to say is in this utopia, are there any castles as we use the word, or everything's level, or what? You didn't specify.
I believe that everyone should have their own castle.
Oh, okay. So people just get to like call their home a castle or something like that. But let's suppose there are no real castles. Let's say that as we use the word, there are no real castles. They've all been demolished or lost to the ravages of time or whatever. Then I think the way to describe it is there are no castles as we use the word, but there are castles as they use the word.
Yeah.
So then we just disambiguate. But what I was saying about your definition of gender is, as we use the word now, you're telling me in that hypothetical scenario, as we use the word now, there would not be any genders. Yeah, that's what you're telling me. Because you're saying, hey, as you use the word now, what you mean is a set of phenotypes, aesthetics, and behaviors that are associated with the sexes. There aren't any of those in this utopia. So as you use the word now, there are no genders in that utopia. There are no men, there are no women. And I'm telling you, like, I don't think that captures the way we use the word man and woman now.
So from a dialectical standpoint, the way that I see this is that I'm describing how we have, and like throughout history, and how we do now still describe a man and a woman. And what you've done is present a scenario where the world isn't as it is or how it has been, and said your definition doesn't fit with this world, this hypothetical utopia. And to me, it's like, yeah, okay, but that doesn't, like, I could do the same with castle. Like, my entire endeavor here is trying to say, I think that if we're trying to describe what a man is, my view will better account for the data. Let's do this. But if you go with a utopian, if you change the circumstances of what is the world, then sure, my definition wouldn't work, and I'd have to have a different definition. Is that? Am I understanding that correctly, or?
Well, I don't want to like belabor the point, and it seems like we might be at an impasse. So I don't know. Maybe we should move on, and if another thought comes to mind, I will share it.
Okay.
Maybe there's other cases besides just this gender utopia or Mrs. Doubtfire or whatever. If anything else comes to mind, I'll put a little star here, and maybe we can come back to it.
That'll be good. And in any case, I will come back to this when watching it back. That'll be interesting. So, okay, let's move to some use cases. I've got use cases that you gave with Cameron on capturing Christianity, and I've also got, of course, my Jane case with complete androgen insensitivity syndrome, and I've got a few other cases. And what I want to do is present these cases and see which view is better accounting for the data. So here's one such case. So here's the scenario. Different cultures have defined adulthood in various ways that do not align with biological reproductive capability, which is not something that you put in your definition. So Roman society, for example, they said that boys were recognized as adults at 14 and they were marked by wearing a toga. However, you wasn't actually recognized as a full adult until you were 25, and then you could hold public office and have civic responsibilities. Jewish culture, bar and bat mitzvah, they have it at 13 and 14 respectively, and it's for religious responsibilities. Notice that this also doesn't align with reproductive maturity. They've got their own line. In this case, it's a religious line. You've got early Christian communities where marriage was considered a marker for adulthood in many early Christian communities at the age of 12 for a woman or a girl. And then for boys, it was typically older, 18, 20. And then there's other tribes, and there's the Amish. And basically, the point here is that throughout history, and indeed today, we have variations of what an adult is, and what we want to do is explain this data with the way that we view gender. And my view is going to look at this and say, yes, it's a cultural construct. And so it isn't surprising at all to find that there are many societies in the past and indeed today that have wildly different views on what gender is. So there's your explanatory scope. It just makes sense of the data. Whereas I'm intrigued as to how adult human male is going to make sense of this data. What is it that you think when you look at these various different cultures that have very different views?
Okay, and the data are that different cultures disagree about when a person becomes an adult?
Yes. Yeah. So in this case, it will be they disagree of when they become an adult, and so consequently they also disagree about when they become a man or a woman.
Okay, yeah. Well, I think like a really troubling piece of data would be people who are using the word man or like a cognate in another language or a synonym in another language to describe someone who they know and say is not an adult. That would be a real problem. If they said like, look at that child, he's a man or something like that. That would be a real problem. But if we just have cases where these cultures are saying, my 12-year-old is now an adult human male, he is now a man, then they seem to be using the word man to mean adult human male. They just have a different conception of when someone's an adult and when someone's a man. So this might just be a case where people are disagreeing about when you have a man, but they're not disagreeing about what a man is. Does that make sense? If they think like my kid's now an adult human male, that means he's a man. That just sort of confirms the man equals an adult human male meaning. Yeah, so I don't think that's kind of contrary data, but I guess it would be nice to have an explanation of why there's so much disagreement about when people become adults, I guess.
Yeah.
But I would have thought that's kind of a problem for anyone who believes in adults, right? I take it you believe in adults and I believe in adults. So why is it that cultures have disagreed about when humans become adults?
So by my lights, it's just it's a social construct, like gender itself.
Yeah.
And so because of that, these wild differentiations in these cultures can be accounted for. Whereas, okay, you don't want to draw the line on reproductive ability, such as Colin Wright did. Whereas I don't know how he would have to deal with this information. But you do want to draw it somewhere. Presumably it's got something to do with cognition or a combination of factors. Maybe it's around 18. That tends to be where a lot of Western countries put it. If it's around 18, then what do we do with these other societies, including our older Christian society that disagrees with us? Were they wrong about what an adult is? Were they not actually men? Is it wrong to refer to, William the Conqueror as a man when he was 14, even though the books might do that? Like, do we have to, like, you see what I mean? Like, there's an interesting dialogue that follows from the views that we have, whereas it seems that my view just looks at it and goes, not a problem.
Okay. It could be that some cultures were just wrong about when someone became an adult. It could also be that what they were really tracking is like sexual maturity. If they thought like, as soon as you hit sexual maturity, we're going to have this ceremony and declare you to be an adult. I still think that they would be wrong about what an adult is. And if we got them to do some philosophical reflection, maybe they'd realize like, okay, this person's not actually fully mature. Maybe that's what the Romans were like glomming onto with this distinction you mentioned between like, well, boys are adults in a certain sense at 14, but then they're full adults at 25. Maybe what they meant was sexually mature at 14, or at least that's what we'll call it. We need like a policy, so we're just going to name it 14.
Sure.
But then they're fully mature and like ready to engage in civic life at like 25. So yeah, I think there is just this distinction between like sexual maturity and full maturity. And probably all these cultures recognize that. And I guess they've had different opinions about which of those markers is sufficient to be marriageable. And I think maybe something we've learned through human history is sexual maturity is not sufficient to be marriageable. That's like not, I don't think that's good. Yeah, just mere sexual maturity is not good enough. We need something more than that. But again, I think this is just a problem for anyone who believes in adults and who believes in like ages of consent. I think we all have to grapple with the fact that there's been disagreements over like when humans are adults and when the age of consent is reached. I was just going to point out that the word adult appears in your definition too, right? I just kind of noticed that when I looked at my notes here. So yeah, if the man is an adult human male view gets in trouble because adult features into the analysis, then I think your view has the same issue because adult features into the analysis.
Okay. I would say that it depends on how people define adult, right? So if you had Colin Wright, and like most people that go with the definition that you put on board, but not yourself, they will do it on a definitive point, such as reproductivity. It seems to me that they have to say that these other cultures were wrong. And that's actually quite a costly thing to have to say, because rather than going in and explaining the data, you're going in and saying they were wrong, but I was right. Whereas I have a view of adulthood that is just like gender in the sense that it's made up, my dude. Like, we're making this up and loosely correlating it with cognition, with sexual reproductivity. We're just making it up. And so it's not surprising that you have this situation where there are many other cultures that don't agree with us where these categories start. But I guess your view also encompasses that, because you do have that vaguity on adulthood, which means you also have that social construct component, if I'm not mistaken, on adulthood, and thus you actually can deal with this data, whereas someone like Colin might have a bit more of a difficulty. Would that be fair?
Well, let me say this. When you say that we just made up adulthood, I can hear that in a way in which it's true, and here's what I think you might mean. There were different kind of transition points or something in a human life that we could have named with the word adult, and that other languages named with a similar term. So we have like sexual maturity, that was one marker. We have like, I don't know, brain maturity, that's another marker. There's all sorts of markers, I guess. Okay, so, and then the question was, well, which one do we name with adulthood? And I think we chose full maturity. That's what we meant by adult, full maturity. We could have chosen something else. I mean, we could have named castles as adults. We could have used the word adult to refer to castles. We could have. We're the boss of our words. We could have used the words however we like. So in that way, it was up to us what the word adult means. But I'm pretty sure that we have chosen something and named it as adulthood. We said, okay, that transition, when you hit that point, the person is an adult. So we've named something, and then it's kind of unclear exactly what we named. And so we're trying to figure out what we named. But if you believe that there really is something out there in the world, there's some transition point in a human life that we call achieving adulthood, or maybe there's just some like stage of human life that we call adulthood. If you think that's real, then I think I don't know. In that way, it's not a social construct, and we didn't make it up, because I guess here's just another way to think about it. Even if humans had never evolved and never come around, there would have been like adult sharks as opposed to juvenile sharks, right? Even if nobody was around to call them adults and nobody was around to call them juveniles, they still would have hit that point. They would have hit that stage that we now name the adulthood stage. So in that way, like, we did not invent adulthood. We just came around and named it.
Would it be fair to put it this way, Thomas? Would it be fair to say that we don't invent the gamete type of the shark? We don't invent when their hormones get them to develop male or female phenotype.
Yeah.
But it does exist in the world. That's more than fair. I think that's correct. Like,
yes.
But the point is like, I just gave two different definitions of where adult could be. But people could disagree of where they want to draw that line.
Yeah.
In animals, we tend to just do a very simple analysis. We just go, you're an adult as soon as you're sexually reproducing. You can sexually reproduce, you're an adult. But whereas with humans, because we're more intimate with the way that we function, that's where we start going, maybe we want to draw it along, cognition. Maybe we want to draw it on something else. Maybe it's to do with viralization of testosterone. Maybe it's hormone presence. Like, that's when we start expanding what we mean by that, right?
Well, the reason I like the full maturity definition is it gives you a uniform account of all these cases. And even when we're talking about animals and we see that they hit sexual maturity and we say this is now the adult stage of that organism, we're still using the full maturity sense. It's just that for simple critters, sexual maturity is full maturity. They just coincide. With elephants, I guess it might be different because they're pretty like social and they're pretty complex animals. And maybe with the great apes, it's different. But for like simple critters like a shark, they reach their like final form at the same time they hit sexual maturity. Like that's it. They're ready to go. They're done growing. Like that's the final form of the shark. So I think that's what we mean by adulthood. Like you've hit your like complete form. All that's left is like degeneration. Like that's all that happens now. You have fully generated. You've hit your final form. You're flourishing. You're an adult. So yeah, now we get a uniform account of like all the cases. So that's why, yeah, again, that's just why I like the full maturity account.
Okay.
Yeah, and I was trying to avoid the social construction talk because, I don't know, I find that equally murky, just like the gender talk. But I think we've done a pretty good job of avoiding that. I was just going to say one more thing. I had another thought about your definition. Do you mind if we talk about that really quick?
Of course, yeah, go for it.
Okay, so when you say that a man is somebody a man is anybody with the phenotypes, aesthetics, and behaviors that we typically associate with adult human males, it occurs to me that those are ands in there, right? You got to have the phenotype and the aesthetics and the behaviors that are typically associated with adult human males. Is that right?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, typically that is the case, but you could have it for instance that someone has the phenotype of a female, but that they have the aesthetics and behaviors of a male, right? And then you're getting someone that's falling into something that's a little bit more difficult to analyze. So yes, it's deliberately broad and loose because my project is to try and describe gender as it is and has been throughout humanity.
Yeah. So I was imagining, I think this is what you were saying, somebody who has the phenotype, so they're like biologically male, no interventions, just a paradigm example of a adult human male, but who doesn't display any of the aesthetics or behaviors that are typically associated with adult human males. So they meet just one of the necessary conditions for being a man. They don't meet two of the other conditions. And so on this proposed definition of man, they wouldn't be men. So I would just propose that I don't think that's the way we ordinarily use the word. I think we would, and I'm just going to call in the self-ID people as like backup. Suppose this person also IDs as a man. So now all the self-ID people are like, okay, definitely a man. But I think even if we've just got a biological male, suppose like raised by wolves or whatever, not part of any society, so here's some linguistic data. Aren't there stories about boys raised by wolves? And couldn't such a boy grow into a man and be a man who was raised by wolves? So we've got the phenotype checked off, but if we're like sufficiently wolf-like, we don't have any of the aesthetics or behaviors that are typically associated with adult human males, but still a man, I would have thought.
In this situation, would it not be the case that you're describing someone who's not part of your culture with a definition that pertains to your culture? So it wouldn't that just... I don't really see the problem with that. So like if your definition does it on phenotype, then to you are going to describe that person as a man.
Well, I guess what I'm reporting is like the way that we here in the English speaking world and in my culture, the way we use the word man, it's not culture specific. There are men in other cultures, even radically different cultures, and there could be a man with no culture at all. There could be a man who was raised by wolves. So it's more like the word planet or shark or... there's all sorts of words that are not like contextually sensitive in this way that vary according to culture. I guess like what are some culturally sensitive words where like you would say like in this culture the person's a such and such but not in this culture? Maybe priest or something like that. Like in this culture that person is a priest, but that person would not be a priest in this culture. So we might have some words that are like culturally that vary by context like that.
Yeah.
But we have other words that aren't culturally sensitive like that, like 6 feet tall or something. Like if this person's 6 feet tall in my culture, they're 6 feet tall in that other culture. Even if they don't measure by feet, it doesn't matter. There are still feet there. They just don't measure by feet. Okay. And I think man is like that. It's not culturally sensitive in that way. It's not. Because
by your light, you're describing a sex. So he either has that sex or he doesn't, right?
Well, we're just doing linguistics here, and I thought we were just we're lexicographers working with a dictionary, and we could just like do a survey and ask people, could there be a boy who was raised by wolves? And I would have thought the way people ordinarily use that word, they'd say yes. Yeah. Could there be a man who was raised by wolves? Yes. So I think if we're trying to capture the way the word is ordinarily used, it is not culturally sensitive in the way that your definition proposes. So that's something to think about anyway.
Maybe an example that could do this then is to illustrate this. So in certain cultures, there are recognized third genders, right? So such as the Hydra in South Asia or the two-spirit people in indigenous cultures in North America, right? So there's also some with Samoan, with Thailand, with native Hawaiians. So you have these different views of what gender is. In this case, our Western view of what gender is going to run into a bit of trouble when we're looking over at, say, these other cultures, because we might look at someone who is part of the Hijra community, and we might just go, that's a man, if we're defining a man to be based on sex or phenotype or something along those lines, whereas they may see it in a different way. So the reason why I say it's typically associated with adult human male, adult human female, is because it typically is. Like, that's a fair way of doing it. But the reason I'm using typical, the reason why I'm sensitive to other cultures and other views, is to make room for the fact that it's not just to make room, it's to make sense of the data. Okay,
so I had noticed that the word typically in your definition, sometimes you put it out front and you say a man is somebody who, or here's what you say, a man is typically a man is anybody who has the phenotypes, aesthetics, behaviors associated with adult human females. Typically, that's what we mean by men. But sometimes we use the word man to refer to something else. So sometimes typically takes like wide scope. It's like out in front of the definition. Typically, a man is somebody who meets these conditions. Not always, but typically. Other times, it typically takes a kind of narrower scope, and you say a man is anybody with the phenotypes, aesthetics, and behaviors typically associated with adult human males.
Okay, right.
So I think if the typically takes a narrow scope like that, then I think the case of the man raised by wolves is going to be a problem, because that person doesn't have the aesthetics and behaviors typically associated with adult human males. I can tell you what those aesthetics and behaviors are. It's like wearing clothes like this and speaking sentences like this. He doesn't have any of those. He was raised by wolves, but I would have thought still a man. But if you put typically out front and it takes wide scope, then I guess you could account for cases like this. And you'd say this is an atypical case. You'd say, like, typically we use the word man to refer to people like me.
So are you saying like the word typical is hierarchically important with the way that I give the definition? So if I put it up front,
where it appears in the definition is going to make a difference. If you put it out front, then the man raised by wolf case, you can say, well, that's not a typical case. And still, it's true that typically the word man refers to somebody with phenotypes, aesthetics, and behaviors.
I think I get the semantic point you're saying, yeah.
But then my worry would just be like, I don't think that's a definition anymore. I guess it's like an empirical hypothesis. Like, here's how I think people typically use the word. But if you're allowing that there are exceptions, what you're telling me is these conditions aren't actually like necessary and sufficient. It's just that typically people who are men have these traits, but not always. It would be like this, like typically humans are born on Earth. In fact, all humans have been born on Earth. So that's quite typical of humans that they be born on Earth, but it's not really part of the definition of being a human, because you could have a human who's born in space or born on Mars or whatever.
Right.
So even if something is typically true of humans, that doesn't mean that that's the definition of being a human. So similarly, even if something's typically true of men, namely that they look like this, that doesn't mean that that's the definition of what it is to be a man. Does that make sense? So I guess it's a little bit of a dilemma. Like if typically takes narrow scope, we've got some data that are, recalcitrant. If typically takes wide scope, then it's not strictly speaking a definition anymore. Okay, so those are just some thoughts I had about that. But I know I took us off the use cases.
No, that's useful. It's always difficult in these situations, because I'm like, do I provide rejoinders, or do I sue forward? Because I appreciate I've taken up nearly 3 hours of your time, so I don't want to be taking up too much longer.
Why don't you tell me about the other use cases you had in mind?
One use case that you gave with Cameron, which I thought was really intriguing, and I think you did it as a bit of a Mauryan shift. You can tell me if that's not the case. But what you said is that, under my view, an individual could travel in one country and then land in a different country, and their gender could have changed. Do you mind unpacking that if I've accurately recalled that criticism so that we can play with that?
Yeah, well, I think that was Cameron's idea, so we should give credit to Cameron for that idea, but I did like sign off on it, and I was like, oh, I think you're right. I think that is a good point. So surely somebody has said this in the literature already, but I guess the only person I can think of is a philosopher. I think Theodor Bach is a philosopher who gave an account of genders according to which they are historical, social kinds. So in order to be a woman, you've got to like stand in the right historical relations to previous women. And so an implication of that view is like there are no women in Japan because they don't bear the right historical relations to the people we're calling women. I don't know, or at least there would be cases like that. So that's the only kind of similarity I can recall from the literature. I hope I'm remembering that right. Okay, but what Cameron had said was if we define man and woman in terms of masculinity and femininity, so that to be a woman basically is to like live up to femininity, and to be a man is to live up to masculinity, and femininity and masculinity are like culturally relative. I should just say that, culturally relative. So that what's feminine in my culture may not be what's feminine in another culture. What's masculine in my culture may not be masculine in another culture. Then, yeah, an implication of that view is going to be that the people who are men in another culture may not be men here. Like they may live up to masculinity over there and be men. Yeah, we'd have to add a little like an indexical qualification. We'd have to say like I'm a man in 21st century United States.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't be a man in Viking culture or something like that. Or maybe I would. I don't know.
You got the beard for it.
Yeah, I flatter myself again. Maybe I would. Okay.
Ripping spines out all across the Anglo-Saxons.
Right. Yeah, like literally. Yeah. Okay. But we'd have to say things like that. Like, we couldn't just ask, is this person a woman, period, full stop. We'd have to say, like, is this person a woman for this culture or for that culture? Okay. And then, yeah, the thought I had was like, well, a kind of vivid way of imagining this is it seems like this view would entail that you could change your gender by getting on an airplane and going to a different culture. If like currently I'm living up to the ideals of masculinity here, but if I went to another culture where the ideals were different, I may not live up to it, so I wouldn't be a man over there. So I guess I would change my gender by changing my location. Okay, so yeah, so premise 2 is, look, that's not the way these words work. Words like man and woman aren't culturally relative in this way. It is possible to just be a man, period, or be a woman, period. We don't have to specify which culture you're a man or a woman according to. So that was the objection. Yeah.
Yeah, I found it to be a very useful objection. So if Cameron watches, thank you, my dude. I appreciate that. To me, I took that as saying, however, if you have a culturally relative view, which is to say a cultural construct that's relative to that society, then it's not going to be the same as another society. And my view is, yes, like, sure, that's the thing. So if you've got a definition that works in your culture and you tend to say men are this phenotype, this aesthetic, this behavior, such as what you might have got, say, 100 years ago in England, it would have been a very specific type that we don't necessarily hold today, especially on the aesthetics and behavior front. Then there's a couple of ways that you can navigate the space. One way is you could go, right, in our culture, you've got to be 18 to be a man. However, that's not the case in Iran. So actually in Iran, you could be a man, but here you're not a man. So if I get on a plane, I could go from being a man to being a boy. And what I think all I think this is really doing is acknowledging that there is different definitions on, yes, what a gender is per culture, if you're gonna, because they got different views of phenotype, aesthetics, behaviors, adulthood, etc. But this is also true of any definition of a man or woman that's going to include adult, which they all do, because the way that we conceive of an adult is not the same way that it's conceived across the pond, right? I mean, one example that comes to mind is in Japan. Up until 2022, you had to be 20 to be an adult, but now it's 18. In Ethiopia, it's 15 for a male, it's 14 for a female. In Islamic countries, it's 14 for males, 8 for females. Like, so yeah, like, I think it's a fair point, but I just, it doesn't seem to do the heavy lifting by my lights. It's not really a problem. It's like, yes, that is the case.
Yeah. Okay, so I agree that there are some words that are like culturally relative. Like the only one that came to mind earlier was priest, but certainly like citizen varies across cultures. So like I'm a citizen here, but if I got on a plane and went to the UK, I wouldn't be a citizen anymore. I'd still be a citizen of the US, but I'm not a citizen of the UK. So yeah, some words do vary according to your location. Yeah, and there are some that have like cultural meanings that vary according to your location. So certainly some words function that way. I was just thinking that man doesn't. I guess certainly legal adult does. Like if I could be legally adult in one country, but not legally an adult in another country. And I guess it would also be true that I could be legally considered a man in some countries, but not legally considered a man in other countries. Mm-hmm. I guess that's what some trans individuals are finding out and complaining about. I guess like back during the marriage debates, people were complaining about the fact that you could be legally married in some states, but other states don't recognize that marriage, so you're not legally married in those other states. So yeah, there are certain concepts like that when we put legally in front of, then certainly we need to specify like which legal code we're talking about. But what this little thought experiment was supposed to suggest about man and woman is that's not the way man and woman work. Man and woman are more like mammal or 6 feet tall or something where it doesn't matter what the law says. You're either a man or not. You're either a mammal or you're not, regardless of what the man says, or regardless of what the law says. I was going to give you just one more quick example. I think this might be happening. So my understanding is the word, I don't know if this is still true, you tell me, but the word pants means one thing in the UK, means something else in the US. Right? Does it still mean like undergarments? It means undergarments in the UK. It means trousers.
If you say that.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. So I could ask like, are there any pants in the UK? Speaking here to my like US friends, and they will know what proposition I'm expressing. I'm asking, are there any trousers in the UK? Yeah. And I could say like, well, I'm wearing shorts today. I'm not wearing pants. I could say that. I'm not wearing pants. I'm wearing shorts. And people in the US will understand what I mean, and that won't be shocking. But if I went to the UK and said something like that, like I'm not wearing any pants, that might be shocking. Or I don't know, it's just too much information, I guess. But I think what's happening here is we've got like one word, but it's ambiguous, and it expresses different meanings in different dialects, I guess. So in the UK, when I say things like "Where are all the pants?" or "I need pants" or something like that, I'm expressing a proposition, or I will be heard as expressing a proposition about undergarments. That's how they will interpret me, because that's the way the word works there. I will be heard as expressing a different proposition here in the US. Okay, so something like that might happen with any word, I guess. We can imagine a language community that uses any word differently from how we use it here. But nevertheless, what I'm asking you to do is consider man as it's currently used, the word man as it's currently used. And now think about a hypothetical situation where a man was raised by wolves. That was tendentious. Think about a certain situation where an adult human male was raised by wolves. Is he a man? I'm asking you to like use the word as we ordinarily use it.
But that's the problem though, isn't it?
Well, in the situation I'm describing, like they don't even use words. The wolves haven't taught this guy any words, so there are no words there. But the proposition's still there that this guy's a man, and it's still true in that situation. So I think, if we just distinguish between like words and what the words refer to, if we distinguish between sentences and propositions, then maybe this thought experiment will still work.
Well, if you take the wolf boy, right? Say he's 14. He's been on Earth for 14 rotations of the sun. You could have two cultures that have a different view of what a man is. One of them will say a man is at 14. We might say a man's at 18. And they will tell a different story about what that person is. Yeah. So one will look at it and go, the way our culture uses it, because we're only in our culture, it is the factual way of the way it's meant to be. We can say that is a boy. Whereas the other culture might look at it and go, no, factually, that person is a man. And really, all I'm doing is looking at it and going, yeah, they've got different definitions. And so you could have it so that this wolf boy he's celebrated. Everyone loves him. He's been out and about in the desert, ripping spines out. And what we do is he goes on a world tour. Well, he goes to one location and he's treated like a juvenile. And then he gets on a plane and he comes here and we treat him like an adult. To me, this isn't it's not really a criticism. I don't see how my view struggles with it at all, if I'm honest.
Well, I think what might be going on in that sort of case where there's apparent disagreement over whether this person is a man or a boy. There's a couple things that might be going on. What might be going on is there's ambiguity. So like maybe some cultures, I don't know, maybe in Spain they're willing to call him hombre or something like that. And maybe in the US there's like, that's not a man. So it could just be that these words are actually expressing different concepts and they're referring to different traits. And so these aren't really synonyms after all. That could be happening. And it could even happen in the same language. You could have different like dialects where pants means one thing in the UK, it means something else in the US. So it could just be genuine ambiguity. But it still might be the case that like if I'm giving you an analysis of like what the word means in one context, if I'm telling you what the word man means around here, it still might be adult human male, even if other people use the word man to mean something else. And they use what we thought were synonyms in other languages to mean something else. That might be happening. But something else that might be happening is it could just be that some of these people are wrong in the way that like if this guy showed up in some cultures and they were like, this person's not even human. This is an animal. He's not human. They would just be wrong. Like that is a human. They're just making a mistake. Or if we took him to a culture that wasn't very good at measuring things and we asked how tall is he and they were like, I don't know, 10 feet tall, they would just be wrong. Like they're still using feet as we use feet. They're just wrong about how many feet tall this guy is. So if they were not calling this person a man, it could just be that they're wrong. He is a man and these people are mistaken. Or it could be that they're using the word man in a different way. And there's some genuine ambiguity going on.
So this is why the social construct view is one of the biggest reasons why I just think it does a better job of explaining the data. So it just is the case that societies have and do use it in such a different way. If you view it as a social construct, there's no problem. You can just look at it and figure it out and go, okay, that's what's going on. But if you want to say there is a right answer to it, there's an essentialist answer, you are going to have to effectively say, my culture's right, and also the time period that I'm born in has got it right. Every other one is wrong. And that just seems to me such an, frankly, unhumble position to have, and just strikingly implausible that this alone is motivation for the social construct theory. Is that a fair representation?
Well, let me clarify. I don't think that people in the UK are wrong when they describe undergarments as pants. I don't think they're wrong. That's what the word pants means over there. Whereas here it means trousers. So yeah, nobody's wrong. There's just genuine ambiguity going on here. So
that's a much more humble view, though, isn't it? That's like basically what I'm saying. If you see what I mean, I'm saying, look, no one's wrong. They have different instantiations of what gender is. Whereas if you're going to go with an essentialist view, you kind of have to go, everyone else is wrong and I'm right. Yeah.
Well, maybe think about this then. I'm not sure. Well, I wonder how much flexibility you think is built in this case. I guess this is a real life case. Suppose we go to like grammar class and they start talking about grammatical gender. Would you say, and they're telling me that like this word is grammatically masculine and this one's grammatically feminine, they have different genders. Would you say that in grammar class, like they have many genders or something like that? Here in the US, like in the dominant mainstream culture, there's 2 genders, but in grammar class, there's like, in German, there's like 3, masculine, feminine, and neuter. I would think it's pretty clear that like they're talking past each other here. They're not both genders in the same sense. We're not talking about the same thing. So similarly, if another culture was like using man and woman or kind of like similar terms to refer to something else, I wouldn't say, like if they were using man to refer to castles and woman to refer to chairs or something, I wouldn't say, wow, what a radically different view of gender they have. I would say they're not talking about gender at all. They're talking about something else that they call gender, but it's not what we call gender. So it's not like we're disagreeing with them when we say castles are not genders, but they say castles are genders. We're not disagreeing.
I would be fine with that fact of just going, well, the way that we use gender.
Yeah.
You know, we've got this situation, but the problem is with the people that want to say no, we have the right definition of gender, they have it wrong, and that is what the essentialist view, it seems to me, is doing.
Yeah.
Like, because it is telling you that there are necessary and sufficient conditions, and so if you find a culture that doesn't hold a view that's exactly the same as your own, even if it's your own culture but just dated back in time, you can't just say we're looking at this differently, like I can on my view. You actually are committed to making a very bold statement of, I'm right, you're all wrong. Do you see what I mean? Like, it's the view seems to entail that.
Well, there. I'll just let me say this. I'll try one more time. The word "man" is actually ambiguous. It used to, not so much anymore, but it used to have like a generic sense where it just meant human, right? So it would be possible in that sense for somebody to be a man, but not a man. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know, Amelia Earhart was a man, but not a man, because she was human, and so we would include her in the mankind category. And in an archaic use of the word man, we'd say, yes, she was of the species man or whatever. So that can happen. And so I don't think that people who use the word man in that way were wrong. They were just using the word to refer to something else. And it was like a well-established sense. There's just genuine ambiguity here. It's like the pants case. Nobody's right, nobody's wrong. But here's another case where I think somebody might actually be wrong. So I think that, as I said earlier, there's really good reasons to suppose that humans found it very useful to track the adult males and adult females of various species. So it makes a lot of sense. I don't think this is a linguistic universal. I don't think you find it in literally every language, but in very many languages, you seem to find words to refer to the adult human males and the adult human females. I think, like, an example of a linguistic universal, I'm pretty sure mother is a linguistic universal. But I think there are some languages, I guess I'm told, that don't have words for adult human males and adult human females, but a whole lot of them do, and we can understand why, because it's very useful. Okay, so if we found someone in another language and they were using these words, let's just like make it a neutral case where they're talking about hens and roosters. Okay, they've got words for hens and roosters, and then they tell me their theory about hens, and they say, you know what, I'm of a mind that birds aren't real, and this hen is a robot, a drone sent by the government. I think the thing to say is they are wrong about what a hen is. They are mistaken about what a hen is. They are actually referring to adult female chickens with the word hen, and they're telling me that a hen is a robot. Okay, that's just false, what they've said. So if somebody had a view like that, and they were like, I'm speaking of men and women, and I'm trying to tell you what the men and women are, and I think, and this is what some of the second wave feminists said, I think men are sexual masters and women are sexual slaves. That's my theory of what the words mean and what they've always referred to. I think we can say, like, we don't have to be jerks about it or like arrogant, but we can say that's mistaken. There could have been a woman who wasn't a sexual slave. There could have been a man who wasn't a sexual master. That's just not what the words mean. And so that's what I was proposing with respect to the view that to be a man, you have to have the phenotype, aesthetics, and behaviors typically associated with adult human males. I was trying to say, like, I don't think that that is an accurate characterization of what we've been referring to this whole time with men, because after all, couldn't there be a man who did not have the aesthetics and behaviors typically associated with adult human males? So I guess I am saying that definition is false. But that's okay. I've proposed a lot of false definitions in my time.
Yeah.
Philosophers, I mean, it's really common for philosophers to say, like, so-and-so's definition is false. That's what Socrates was all about.
So what would be helpful then for me to ground what you're saying here? You were saying that no one is right and no one is wrong about, say, what pants are. And you were saying that no one is right and no one is wrong about what a woman is. But that would be a cultural relativistic view, and it would be a social construct view, whereas it seems that you do want to say that no, some other cultures are wrong on what a woman is, even if they define it in different ways. So is that right?
So I did say something like, in the pants case, neither group is right, neither one's wrong. But I wouldn't go so far to say, like, you just simply can't be wrong about what pants are. Like if me here, like speaking American English, said, "Look at this nice pair of pants. Isn't this a great pair of pants?"
Yeah.
I would be saying something false. This is not a pair of pants at all. So you can be wrong about what pants are. But when I hear a British person describe undergarments as pants, I don't think they're mistaken. They're just using the word pants to refer to a different type of garment. And that's a well-established practice that is a concept that is expressed by that word in UK English. So they're not wrong. Okay, but yeah, I wouldn't go so far as to say like there are no truths about what are pants and what aren't pants. I wouldn't go that far. Okay, and a similar thing could happen with words like man and woman. There are like recognized ambiguities with the word man. There is a generic sense where it just means humankind. There's a more specific sense where it means adult human male. So if somebody said like Amelia Earhart is not even she's not a member of mankind, she's not a man in that way, I would say that's wrong. She is a human, of course. She's a member of like humankind. So she's a man in that way. Yeah, so you could still be wrong even once we disambiguate, you could still be wrong. Yeah.
Okay, so let's just take one of those cases, right? When you look at, say, Iran, and they say that a woman is at 9, are they wrong?
Did you say a woman is a 9?
9, yeah. So like at 9 years old,
oh,
considered a woman.
I thought you meant like on a scale of 1 to 10.
Yeah, we've went full sexism, man. We're just going to start ranking
I was like, do they really,
different countries
do
with
they
numbers.
really say that in Iran? You have to be a 9? It's a high bar. Okay, so in Iran they might say like at 9. I don't know if this is true, but suppose there's a culture that's...
I believe it is.
Oh, wow, that's wild. Okay, so if they said like you reach womanhood at 9 years old, then I think as like from a third person perspective, interpreting what's going on in this linguistic game that they're playing, in this language that they're speaking, I would try to... We're pulled in different directions, and one of the interpretive principles is to try to maximize truth. So I would try to interpret this language in such a way that maximizes truth. And so I would say, like, it looks like they have a word that I kind of suspected was picking out adult human females, but actually it's picking out, I don't know, sexually mature females or something like that. So it's not actually a synonym with woman in English. It's something else. So
what if they get all the rights which are related with adulthood? So like they can have property and they can, they're expected to have like these civil relationships with their society, right? Are they wrong?
Well, then it starts, that's some evidence pulling in the other direction that they really do mean like adult when they call this adult, when they call this 9-year-old an adult. They really do mean adult the way that we mean adult. And then that's some evidence pulling in the direction that they're saying false things. They have a mistaken conception of adulthood when they say the 9-year-old is an adult. I'm just saying it's like one of those two things. Either the word that we thought was a synonym for woman in their language actually doesn't mean the same thing as our word woman. It means just sexually mature female. Mm-hmm. Or it is a synonym for woman and they're saying false things about the 9-year-old when they call her a woman.
That makes sense, yeah. I guess, so what you could do is look at all of these different societies, and you'll find people in those societies, because they've grown up in those societies, they'll be relying on their intuitions, which are carved by their societies, and they'll be very confident going, the West has got it wrong, we've got it right. Iran's got it wrong, we've got it right. And I just like look at all of these different cultures, and I go, bro, you're all close. You're all close. Like, you're recognizing the faults and you're seeing the pieces, but you're not applying it to your own view. And so I don't want to labor the point too much, but like that's one of the motivations for why I see a big issue with the essentialist view. It seems to want to commit me to things that are just very uncomfortable. Like that doesn't seem plausible. Yeah. And then when you come up with, when Cameron comes up with the objection of getting on a plane, which to be fair, you bolstered, by my lights, it's just not a problem. Okay, I'll just say one thing on behalf of the essentialist. So I take it the essentialist is, well, the view that women are adult human females and men are adult human males is often labeled as essentialist, and more specifically a kind of biological essentialism. And if the worry is that, well, if you accept that kind of essentialist view, you have to say that like a lot of people are mistaken in their judgments about who's a woman and who's a man. Just on behalf of essentialism, I'll say,
any view that tells you like what a man is and what a woman is, even if it's not biological essentialism, any view that proposes a definition is going to say like, if you give any other definition, you're wrong. Like this is the true definition. This is what the word means. And so it's wrong to say that women are adult human females. It's wrong to say that men are adult human males. It's wrong to say that a man is anyone who identifies as a man, and so on. So I think we're all kind of in the same camp where we think our view is correct and every other view is wrong. But that's very common in philosophy. Yeah. So,
but I don't.
I am inured to that charge that like, well, isn't it arrogant to think that you're right and everyone else is wrong? It's like, well,
it's not just that. It's if you didn't have data that conflicted or data that's hard to explain, then sure, you know,
that would be worse.
Thinking it, but when there is data like what I think, such as what I've just given, how do we account for this data? Why is it that Aquinas was okay with this? Like, how do we make sense of this? And to me, it just seems really clear that my view just looks at it and goes, "Yep, that's exactly what I told you you're going to find." It explains the data. It's predictable. Okay. Whereas the essentialist view is looking at it and going, no, Aquinas was wrong. No, they're all wrong. I was right. And like, to me, that is, funny enough, it's the opposite of like the attribute of humility that a lot of Christians try and champion, right? Because it's not that. It's the opposite by my lights, I should say.
So when you say Aquinas was wrong, it's in his view that like it is morally permissible for 12-year-olds to get married. You're saying that was one of Aquinas's views?
So if Aquinas existed 1,000 years ago, so he was part of a culture where it was different with how they viewed adulthood, and they did view adulthood with it wasn't 18 for them. Like that wasn't a conceivable thing, but they were still really sure with their definitive categories that they believed that they got from God that womanhood does start at wherever he drew it. I think it was around 14. And yet what we could do is look at that data and go, we've learnt more, Aquinas was wrong. Like it's basically, it's data analysis. Sorry if I'm failing to articulate. It's been...
No, that's okay. I too am running up against that limit at which my brain starts shutting down. Well, I don't know if that's what you were saying about your brain, but that's definitely happening to my brain.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, 3 hours is kind of like the maximum. I guess about the Aquinas thing, I would just say like, if the view is that if he said something in Latin that we would translate as like 12-year-olds are adults, then one possibility is like that Latin word that we're translating as adults doesn't mean what we mean by adults. And so what he said was actually true. It's just we shouldn't translate it as adults as we currently use the word. In just the same way that like there were contemporary, or I don't know, another example of a word that has changed its meaning is Santa Claus. That name used to refer to Saint Nicholas. Now it refers to a creature of fiction that was kind of like mashed up with Nordic mythology or something. So the name Santa Claus used at a previous age referred to Saint Nicholas. Now it refers to fiction, something that doesn't really exist. Mm-hmm. Okay. So if at a previous time I see somebody saying like Santa Claus died and was buried, I think that what they're saying is true. I just understand that as they were using the name Santa Claus, it referred to Saint Nicholas, who did die and was buried. They're not telling me about like the Nordic elf who delivers presents. According to the myth, that guy never died and he was never buried. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I just like understands that the name can have different reference at different times and different contexts. So similarly, if Aquinas was using a word to refer to 12-year-olds and calling them something that we're kind of inclined to translate as adults, one possibility is that's not the right translation. He was referring to just sexual maturity, and what he said was true. But another possibility is, no, he really did mean like adult, and then he was just wrong. I think there's a lot to be said for Aquinas. I think he's one of the greatest philosophers who ever lived, but he definitely said some false things. He had some views about physics that were mistaken, that were like, good for the time, but mistaken. He thought that light traveled infinitely fast. That's one of the things that he thought. And he gave arguments for it. He gave proofs for it, but he was just mistaken about that. So yeah, I myself am not, I don't know. I am hesitant to like disagree with Aquinas, but he could have said some false things. Yeah,
That's fair. And, like a lot of us agree with Aristotle, but we do say he was wrong on plenty of things. So that's fair. The last thing then, with a sensitivity to time, and I just want to reiterate, I've really enjoyed this conversation as I've enjoyed your work, and just so thank you so much for your time. This has been incredibly fruitful for me.
Maybe we could do it again sometime. I liked it too, yeah.
Absolutely. Last case then will be complete androgen insensitivity syndrome. So this is the primary case that I've been putting on the table for trying to get people to think the way that I think about gender and sex. And so just to give a quick recap of what it is, suppose we have a person called Jane, and she discovers in her 40s that she has complete androgen insensitivity syndrome. This means that despite having a female phenotype and vagina, she has XY chromosomes and testicles inside her where ovaries normally are. This is a real condition. You can look it up. If you see someone with this condition, you will not be able to tell that they're male by traditional definitional standards, but they are. That is how that's going to be cashed out. Now, the way that I look at this is that her phenotype, her aesthetics, and her behaviours all pertain and relate to what our culture and what most cultures would refer to as a woman. So there's no entailment from anything by discovering that she has this condition. It's very simply, yeah, okay, it's fine. We don't go with essentialist definitions. There are always exceptions. It's just not the boxes that we tend to put everyone in. You can get some males. Here's a male that is a woman. Whereas the essentialist view is going to have to do some work here. What you said with Cameron is you would say, and correct me if I get this wrong, you would say this person isn't a woman, they are a man because they're male, but we should treat them as if they're a woman. Would that be a fair representation of the view you expressed? Or?
Yeah. So I thought your argument was something like, if you think women are adult human females and men are adult human males, then in the case where we discover somebody has CAIS, we would have to treat this person in pretty like aggressively cruel ways. We'd have to dissolve the marriage, tell the kids they don't really have a mom, take her ribbons off and make her dress like a man, and so on. So I had just said, like, there's nothing about the view that men are adult human males and women are adult human females that would require you to act in that way.
Yes,
and then in fact that might be pretty cruel.
But suppose this though. So like, I don't know what your views are on this, but like a lot of Catholics and a lot of Christians, they will be against homosexual couples. Can't have it. It's against the Bible. It's been said, done. This would be an instance of a homosexual couple. It is two males together. That's why they couldn't reproduce with the scenario I gave. So the natural entailment is going to be our society does not let males copulate with males, and so you must divorce. If we have in our society other things that relate to the genders, which we did, with what you can do, and, suppose that she, you get the point. Like, there's just all of these elements. And to me, it's like the entailment of your view is that if you don't do that to this person, then actually you're demonstrating that you don't use your definition, you use my definition. And I think that some of the people in Capturing Christianity's audience, well, I say think, I know, like one of the biggest criticisms to you was, actually, no, Thomas, we do actually have to do this, because we can't just treat this person as a woman. What does it even mean to treat someone as if they produce large gametes? Like, that's not so yeah, like that, basically that is what I was getting at with the entailments. The fact that you don't want to do it is telling you that the definition you use isn't the essentialist one. It's actually more like my one by my lights.
So yeah, what I hear you saying is, if you don't dissolve the marriage and tell the children that they have no mother, then you don't really believe that women are adult human females and men are adult human males.
Maybe I could put that away that's not so loaded then. Suppose that suppose that you maintain that you cannot have homosexual couples. Well, under your view, that is a homosexual couple because they are both the same sex.
Okay.
So why wouldn't you dissolve it? Why would you make an exception for
Okay,
this
right.
case?
So if this couple had been married by the Catholic Church, So this is kind of out of my lane here because I'm not like a canon lawyer, and there are people that I would ask about this, and I would not be the person that I would ask about this.
Yeah.
But I know that I shouldn't have said I know. I'm pretty sure there's a condition that says like both people have to be Catholic for it to be a Catholic marriage. And the marriage has to be consummated with like an act of copulation. And so I honestly don't know what the Catholic view is about somebody with CAIS who appears to have female genitalia and whether they would count any kind of sexual act there as a kind of consummation. But probably, according to like Catholic canon law, in order for the marriage to be legitimate, it's got to be members of the two sexes. You couldn't have same-sex couldn't have a same-sex couple that is married in the Catholic Church. Okay, so I guess if you were to ask me, like, if these individuals were Catholic, would it follow then that this wasn't really a legitimate marriage, that this wasn't what the Catholics are calling marriage? And I would say yes, that wasn't a legitimate marriage. It was like through no fault of either party, they didn't know. But yeah, it doesn't meet the requirements for a legit Catholic marriage.
Yeah.
In just the same way that like if a marriage was never consummated, then it's not a legit marriage. And if somebody was like coerced into the marriage, it wasn't a legit marriage by Catholic lights. Okay, but if the question was just like, this is a civil marriage, it's like a legal marriage, what should we do?
So I could say, look, as someone that believes that two members of the same sex can't get married, I'm assuming that's your belief. What do you want to do with Jane? Do you want to force her to, or him under your view, to break up with this individual? And if you don't want to use it in the context of a Catholic framework or a Christian framework even, you could do it this way. Do you want to make her use the men's bathroom?
Yeah.
Really? Do you want to make her go into men's sports? Really?
No, I don't think so.
Would you?
I don't know. This is one of those hard cases that makes bad law. You've got somebody who...
No, but it doesn't make... This is the thing. I'm not trying to change the law based on this individual. I'm just screaming from the rooftops. Make some room for these people. They exist.
Yes.
The boxes aren't as clear cut as we want it to be. So make some damn room. Like that's why this is my biggest grievance with this essentialist view. It just doesn't make sense of the data. And then when it comes to a scenario like this, the people that maintain that view don't even want to actually act on their view. They actually want to act on my view, which in their case is going, let's make an exception. Making an exception to a rule which is essentially admitting that it isn't accounting for it.
Well, if they had said, like, this is an exception to the definition that a man is an adult human male and a woman is an adult human female, then that would be just admitting that the definition is false and that men aren't really adult human males and so on.
Yes.
But you're sort of asking questions about public policy, like how should we organize society? Who should we recognize and treat as married? Who should we admit in which bathrooms? And I think that even, I was about to speculate about like even what the most radical feminists would say, but I'm going to take that back. I think that many people would say that if you've got somebody with CIAS who appears to be female and like didn't experience any of the benefits of male puberty and, I just said benefits, but I guess there are some costs too.
There are, but like if you're talking sports, there's benefits. If you're talking mass, there's benefits. Yeah.
Yeah, any of the like increased strength, muscle mass, etc. Then what sports should this person be allowed to play, and what bathroom should this person be allowed to use? Then you could admit of exceptions to public policy without thereby admitting that like the definition's false. And I guess maybe we could try to think of some examples. I'm going to try to summon up all the bits of brain that I have left.
Yeah.
Could there be cases where somebody is not really a citizen, but we like decide to treat them as citizens, or somebody's not really a Californian, but we treat them as a Californian? In that video I made with Cameron, I tried to think of cases like this. I guess, okay, here's a case I use in that video. There are some people who like suffer from severe cognitive disabilities that we know we kind of treat them as though they're children. And we don't think that like invalidates the definition of what it is to be an adult or what it is to be a child. We know full well that this person is an adult. But like given the cognitive limitations, the compassionate thing to do and the appropriate thing to do is to limit their privileges and responsibilities so that we're kind of treating them like their children. So we do that in society. I'm trying to think of other examples. But that's the only one that comes to mind with age.
Fair enough. I guess for me,
yeah. So maybe it might be like that. We know full well that this person is a male, but given the circumstances, like maybe we make an exception when it comes to public policy this time. Whereas there are other cases where, like somebody is clearly paradigmatically male, and we realize like we should not reorganize society so as to allow people like this to play women's sports or to enter women's bathrooms. Yeah. So public policy is way messier than biology and philosophy, I think.
Yeah, no, I get that. But like when you have a definition and like the strength of the definition is meant to be that it can account for the data, and then like you have this scenario come up and the disposition is actually to take your opposition's view. Like if that isn't going to serve as a clear indicator that maybe this strong definition that you have isn't quite cutting it, it strikes me that pretty much nothing's going to get through. I mean, to me, complete androgen insensitivity syndrome is the platypus. It's come on in and it's fucked up our boxes and tough. Get used to it. That's what it's done. So what we do is we go, you know what? Most mammals give birth to live young, but there are some cases where that's not true. And what's happened here is we've went, you know what? Most cases, vast majority of cases of a women, they are adult human females, but there are some women that are male.
Yeah.
Done. Sorry, it's just the way it works. God works in mysterious ways.
Yeah. No, I think if this were like a clear case of a woman who was clearly male, then that would be a counterexample to the women equals adult human females definition and man equals adult human males. If we had a clear case of a woman who is a clear case of a male, I don't think this is like a maximally clear case of male, but it is pretty clear. I think it's pretty clear case of male. I definitely don't think this is a clear case of a woman. It's certainly somebody who appears to be a woman, for sure.
Well, here's what's interesting, right? So they have the SRY gene. They have the chromosomes. They even have testicles.
Yeah.
They have all of this. The only thing that went wrong in their body is that they couldn't viralize during puberty. That's it. So they've got what you gave as a definition before, which would constitute malehood.
Well, yeah, the definition I gave before was that second order function. And I agree that like the conditions you listed certainly suggest we've got that second order function realized here. So I think among all the differences of sexual development, this is one of the clearer cases. And I think there's like a lot of medical bodies even recognize like CAIS is a case of a male who appears to be female, who appears to be a woman. So I think this is a fairly clear case. It's not like maximally clear. It's not as clear as your case or my case, but it's pretty clear it's a clear case of a male. But then the question is it also a clear case of a woman? Is this person clearly a woman? So I admit that like such people certainly appear to be women, but I think a little bit of philosophical reflection helps us realize that merely appearing to be a woman is not enough to be a woman. Just as like appearing to be, I don't know. There's lots of cases where appearance is different from reality. Things are not always the way they appear to be.
True.
And I think if we reflect on what words like man and woman mean, we realize like just appearing to be a man is not enough to be a man. And even the self-ID people will agree with me on that.
But like that's the thing is that has a begging the question element in, because it's presuming a definition of man to be able to make the statement in the first place.
Well, no.
Whereas my view is they are a woman.
Yeah.
Like it's not they represent as a woman, because I don't think that sex is a necessary condition. Rather, they are a woman. It's just that's what that is. There are some women that are males. That's how that would be cashed out. But yeah, I hope that that makes sense.
Well, hold on. Let me ask you really quick. Well, why do you think this person is a woman? Why do you think Jane is a woman? I would have thought that I'm not so sure Jane meets your definition of what it is to be a woman. Does Jane have the phenotype typically associated with adult human males? The phenotype you said includes primary and secondary sexual characteristics, and we've got no ovaries in this situation. There are no ovaries. In fact, there are testes. And so does Jane have the phenotype that's typically associated with males?
Yes. So she has phenotype is going to consist of like a cluster of attributes. So the primary sexual characteristics, secondary sexual characteristics of body and structure and shape that we went through at the beginning. She has a vagina. She has breasts. She has female wide hips. She has female shorter shoulders. She has female shorter height.
Yeah.
Loads of these things she ticks off, but she doesn't have ovaries.
So like some of those boxes Jane checks, like the secondary sexual characteristics. But the primary sexual characteristics, like the gonads, Jane does not check those boxes for being a woman. Is that right?
Yes, but it's not a necessary condition on my view. So the fact that she doesn't check that, but she checks...
We just have to have secondary sexual characteristics in order to have the phenotype that's typically associated with adult human.
It's a collection, right? So because it's a collection of like, we wouldn't say, for instance... Just as we wouldn't say that a menopausal woman isn't a woman because she no longer has the function of, you know, what she had before, or just as we say if she got those elements removed, or she had a gene where it didn't develop, like we wouldn't say they're not a woman. All we can say is that in most cases that is actually a relevant factor, but it's not in all cases.
Oh, okay. Yeah, maybe we should have spent more time ironing out just what it is to be male or female. And I guess we'd have to get clearer on what this phenotype is that you've put into the definition of woman and man. Yeah, that's what we're thinking about now. But I'm going to be honest with you, Stephen. Yeah, I think I got to stop. I think my brain's dead.
Honestly,
yeah.
it's been fantastic. Just
right.
to reiterate, I love your work. I love your demeanor. It's genuinely a pleasure to have had this conversation with you. Hopefully we'll do it again. I'm sure I'll hit you up privately with a few questions here and there.
Okay.
But yeah, just thanks. I really do appreciate it, and I hope you enjoy your surfing afterwards.
Okay.
I'll go on kayaking, believe it or not.
All right. It's good talking with you.